which during its infamous 900-day Nazi siege saw 1 million people die. But through tragedy and rebirth, the Hermitage has endured. Like the Louvre in Paris, it remains one of the great museums of the world.
This extraordinary place is an art museum, one of the greatest in the world. It's also been a good many other things. It was the palace of the Russian Tsars, a seat of absolute imperial authority. It's been the scene of exotic love affairs. One ruler was murdered here. Great ideas were conceived in these opulent chambers. This also served as a gilded blinder to those imperial autocrats, and there was more than one of them, who didn't want to know about the reality of Russia and its long-suffering people. But above everything else, the Hermitage is, represents, and remembers. It is a repository of art. The Hermitage collection was accumulated over more than 2 centuries by one Tsarina, 6 Tsars, and the communist commissars who came after them. The palace, which houses the collection, is itself a work of art. Its 1,000 rooms express the taste of 2 centuries. From replications of ancient Roman mosaics to the Baroque complexities of the 18th century. The extensions to the Winter Palace were called Hermitages. The name now refers to all 5 buildings of the Hermitage, including the Winter Palace. It was built in the 1750s by Francesco Rastrelli to be the winter residence of the Tsars. He's credited with inventing the architectural style known as Russian Baroque. Rooted in 18th century Western European design, Rastrelli's creation incorporates bright colors from the houses of northern Russia and the unique ornamentation of Orthodox churches. The Hermitage is thus inseparable from the great city around it, named St. Petersburg at its birth, Petrograd during World War I, and then Leningrad after the death of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin in 1924. And finally, following the collapse of Soviet communism, the city returned to its original name, St. Petersburg. It is not an old city like London or Paris. It's not even as old as Boston. But it is a sublime expression of 18th century architecture. It was built by Peter the Great as his capital. St. Petersburg became a proclamation of Russia's might and potential importance in the world. The Winter Palace was begun in 1754, 29 years after the death of Peter the Great by his daughter Elizabeth. It was larger than the Louvre and the Tuileries put together, and was designed to be St. Petersburg's crowning masterpiece, the official home of the Tsars, a function it fulfilled for 260 years. In 1762, when Catherine the Great assumed power, it was here in the Winter Palace. For the next 34 years, she presided over one of the more glorious and turbulent epochs of Russian history. It was Catherine who dramatically expanded the imperial art collection that grew into the Great Hermitage Museum. She knew that to amass great art was not only a demonstration of taste, but of power. Like Peter the Great, she was a visionary, and like Peter, she turned to the West for ideas and culture. Catherine was not Russian. She was German by birth, the daughter of a minor princeling. In 1745, at the age of 15, she married the heir to the Russian throne. Young Peter III seems to have been a neurotic dullard. He was more interested in his collection of toy soldiers than in his new young wife. The lonely and treacherous life of the Russian court toughened Catherine. Reading was her sanctuary. She subscribed to the gossipy private newsletter of European philosophy and the arts, the Correspondance littéraire, edited by Baron Melchior von Grimm. Like Catherine, Grimm was a German whose culture was French. They began writing to each other. During her lifetime, Catherine composed more than 1,500 letters to this erudite man. Catherine wrote elegantly in French, badly in Russian. She was a veritable fountain of words and ideas, writing everything from serious political philosophy and history to light entertainments. In 1762, Catherine's husband became Tsar Peter III. Their marriage of 18 years had ceased to exist, except as a formality. Immediately, Peter alienated everybody around him. He practiced Lutheranism in defiance of the orthodoxy that was his country's state religion. He insisted on speaking German, rather than the preferred language of the Russian aristocracy, which was French. Catherine, on the other hand, was fluent in French and made every effort to perfect her Russian. She had abandoned Lutheranism to embrace the Russian Orthodox Church. She had become enthralled with Russia and adored the country passionately for the rest of her life. Catherine had developed powerful friendships in the imperial court and the military. Intimately aware of her husband's weaknesses and eccentricities, she'd spent years preparing her own ascent to the throne. Then, in June 1762, it all came to a head. The growing discontent finally persuaded the aristocratic Orlov brothers to take action. They staged a palace coup. Peter was deposed and murdered a few days later. The royal court announced, officially and with a straight face, that the Tsar had died of colic. Catherine was quickly crowned Tsarina, or Empress, in an elaborate ceremony staged in Moscow. Most Russians were delighted to be rid of Peter and to have their bright, elegant new ruler. The Tsarina returned to the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, where she was received with pomp and awe. The reign of Catherine the Great had begun. To the imperial throne, she brought an autocrat's will tempered by a liberal intellect. She knew a great deal about Western European art and literature, and she'd already conceived of a way of using art to elevate Russia's prestige and influence. She didn't try to impress the courts of Europe by collecting a few masterpieces. She collected masterpieces by the carload. Rubens, Reynolds, Watteau, Carracci, Rembrandt. I am not a lover of art, Catherine said of her own collecting. It is voracity. I'm a glutton. She tended to buy other people's taste with entire collections of pictures. Franz Hals' Young Man with a Glove was one of 200 masterpieces bought from the merchant Gotskowski. The Gotskowski purchase was also a personal and political coup for the new Tsarina. The pictures had been collected for King Frederick of Prussia, the idol of Catherine's late husband, Peter III. But Frederick had gotten himself involved in Europe's 7 Years' War and was broke. Catherine the Great wasn't. The collection also included Van Bobberen's Concert. She was a fiercely competitive art buyer who enjoyed the acquisition game against other collectors for its own sake. When a collection of 198 masterworks became available in England, Catherine snatched it up. It included 15 Van Dycks, among them his double portrait of Philadelphia and Elizabeth Wharton. Lorraine's Gulf of Bailly. Jordain's own family portrait. Murillo's Assumption of the Virgin. And Rembrandt's monumental Abraham's Sacrifice of Isaac. They'd been collected by Sir Robert Walpole, the former Prime Minister of Britain. The pictures also included the cream of English painting. Eworth's portrait of Edward VI, painted about 1550. John Wooton's Hounds and a Magpie. And Godfrey Knoller's portrait of the woodcarver Grindling Gibbons. Samuel Johnson, one of the great literary figures of the day, denounced the Walpole sale. The controversy spilled over into the House of Commons, where members were incensed that a chapter in the history of British art would be shipped off to barbaric Russia. Catherine wrote her agent,
"You see how the birds fly into my snare of their own accord? Your humble servant has got her claws on them, and will no more let them go than a cat would a mouse.
Another of Catherine's early acquisitions was Jesus Healing the Blind Bartimaeus by the great Dutch colorist Lucas van Leyden. Catherine's critics insisted that she didn't love her art, but just collected it for display and competition. If Catherine wasn't an art lover, what was it all about, this gluttony for the beautiful? In fact, she demonstrated a deep affection for her paintings. She used to wander through the hallways and vast state chambers at night, looking at her treasures. To the sculptor Falconet, she wrote,
"Only the mice and I can admire all this." My pictures are beautiful. When would you like to come and see them?
Catherine spent the brief northern summers at Tsarskoe Selo, a country palace just outside of St. Petersburg. But she was most at home in her great winter palace, surrounded by her growing art collection.
I moved to my little winter shack, walked up the marble staircase, and passed through room after room to walk amid quantities of things that I love and delight in. My little retreat is so situated that to go back and forth from my room takes 3,000 steps. And it is these winter walks that keep me in good health and on my feet. Then returning to my room after having walked around the whole palace, about 2 miles.
Catherine was not an especially religious woman, but owned hundreds of pictures that, in previous centuries, had been produced through the patronage of the Roman Catholic Church. When offered several of Raphael's religious works, Catherine felt she'd had more than enough.
If the subject matter is too sad or solemn, I'm not interested.
Much of her collection, like Chardin's Washerwoman, was completely secular. A game of backgammon by Jan Steen. Snyder's Village Fruit Stall. Lancret's appreciation of a ballerina in Camargo dancing. And Peter Paul Rubens' portrayal of the eternal lovers, Venus and Adonis. The Winter Palace walls were becoming crowded with paintings, its halls cluttered with tapestries and sculpture. In 1763, Catherine had a winter garden built on the main level of the Winter Palace. It was enclosed, it was filled with exotic plants, birds, and monkeys. The tropics had been brought to the frozen north. The Tsarina had 2 pavilions put up on either side of the garden, and there she gave dinner parties and hung pictures. This was the beginning of the addition to the Winter Palace that Catherine the Great called her Hermitage. The word Hermitage means, of course, the dwelling place of a hermit, usually a holy man. Although the gossips of history have exaggerated Catherine's romantic life, she did have a long succession of lovers, and she was decidedly not a puritanical lady. In naming the great extension of the Winter Palace, she was simply following the fashion of her day. Many great estates in 18th century Europe had elegant little hermitages used for informal entertaining, reading, and gossiping. Servants were excluded, so that the royal guests need not fear that their antics would be reported to their critics. Catherine, her friends, and her court lived it up in her outsized hermitage, but there were rules governing their behavior, composed by the Empress herself.
Leave all rank outside, along with hats and swords. High spirits are fine, but don't damage or break anything. Speak quietly. Don't shout and give others nearby a headache. Don't sigh, don't yawn, and don't burden or bore anyone. Eat to your heart's content, but drink with moderation so that you are able to find your legs and leave by the door. Mind your own business, and don't wash your dirty linen in public.
Catherine surrounded herself with splendor, a symbol of her imperial power as much as personal self-indulgence. She wore and used exquisite objects, which are now part of the Hermitage collection. This brooch, a veritable spray of rubies, emeralds, and diamonds. The water in which she washed her hands was brought to her in this golden pitcher. The serious work of Catherine's life was intertwined with this almost overpowering elegance. Her motto, usefulness, was emblazoned in jewels on her snuff box. For court and ceremonial occasions, she wore this jeweled sword. And this chalice was used in many coronations, including hers.
The threads of art and history have indeed joined your home with 13 during this broadcast. Obviously, you want good television, and we need your contribution to supply it. All you have to do is call 1-800-468-9913 or 1-800-272-1313 and join us as a 13 member. In fact, if you make a contribution of $250 or more, our thanks will be the entire 3-part series on the Hermitage in a box set of VHS tapes. We have other ways to thank you, but whatever you contribute right now will no doubt result in future programs like the Hermitage, A Russian Odyssey. And now, let's go to Tom Stewart for another great incentive to get you to your phone right now.
Thanks, Raphael. We are absolutely delighted to welcome the folks of AT&T to our studio tonight during this wonderful broadcast event. All of these AT&T staff members have given up their free time and volunteered to come to our studio to take your call. But even more than that, they're here with a very generous offer to get to your phone. And here's what that's all about. Take a look.
Good evening. I'm very pleased and honored to represent the people of AT&T during this special member recruitment for Channel 13. AT&T has thousands of people living and working in 13's viewing area, and 13's programs are a wonderful source of entertainment and information for us and our families. Tonight, we at AT&T would like to offer all of you who enjoy 13 an opportunity to double your support of this fine station. I have with me a check for $15,000, and I'd like nothing better than to hand over this money to 13. But there's a way to make things a lot more interesting, I think. I want this check to become a challenge to each of you. So make a pledge during the course of this evening, and AT&T will match your contribution dollar for dollar up to the full amount of this check, $15,000. And I would also like to encourage all of our AT&T employees who are watching tonight to call in and make a pledge of support to WNET. Let's keep all of the AT&T volunteers handling tonight's calls very, very busy. AT&T has always been a supporter of public television, and I'm glad to be here to express that support from the AT&T people in 13's viewing area. So come on, folks, call in and help us give away this $15,000.
Thank you, Mr. Butkus, and thank you, AT&T. Remember, no matter how much you contribute, when you go to your phone right now and make that all-important call, every dollar of your contribution will be matched dollar for dollar by AT&T. Again, the numbers to call are 1-800-468-9913 or 1-800-272-1313. The men and women of AT&T will be with us for our entire broadcast of this magnificent series on the Hermitage. Stay with us, and I hope you'll make a membership contribution along the way. If you've been waiting for a great art series on 13, we're very pleased that we are able to bring you the Hermitage tonight. But that may not be an option available to either you or 13 in the future. The congressional uproar over public funding for public television has somewhat quieted, but the future is still in question. The fact is, your help has become even more essential to 13 than ever. Our funding has been cut drastically this year on both the federal and state levels, and we're going to be hit again next year, so we're certainly not out of danger by any means. So, if you're ready to join us, we are ready to thank you, and Tom is ready to tell you how.
Thanks, Raphael. We want to share this program with you in as many ways as possible. Now, as we mentioned earlier, the entire series on the Hermitage on 3 videotapes is our thanks for your contribution of $250 or more. For a pledge of $100, we'll send you the CD-ROM Introduction to the Hermitage. This disc is IBM compatible, and it's your chance to wander at your leisure through the galleries once visited by the Czars. All 6 departments of the Hermitage are covered in this disc, and you can zoom, pan, or microscope the masterpieces of art and sculpture in this world-renowned museum. So if you or someone you know is at all computer literate, this high-tech membership bonus is certainly something to ask for as our thanks for your $100 contribution. So make that call right now while there's still time. And remember, too, that your $100 gift will be doubled by the folks at AT&T.
And here's another membership suggestion. If you can join us with a contribution of $150 or more, our thanks will be a copy of Hidden Treasures Revealed. This large and magnificent volume is really the story of the disappearance and reemergence of some great masterpieces during the Second World War. For a long time, it was believed that these magnificent works of art had been destroyed in the war, but later it was revealed that they were carried off to Russia and stored at the Hermitage. All in all, it's a remarkable story, and the illustrations and full-color plates of the artworks themselves will make a wonderful addition to your personal library. Hidden Treasures Revealed can be yours for your membership contribution of $150. And again, our friends at AT&T will match your $150 gift dollar for dollar. They'll even match your special $40 first-time membership donation to 13, which, of course, will also get you your first 13 tote bag, among other things.
And don't forget, of course, you can charge your pledge on any major credit card if that's what you prefer. Just have your favorite card with you when you go to your telephone. Now, if you're already a 13 member, please consider making an additional contribution as your thanks and appreciation for our bringing this wonderful series right into your home. Or think about this. If a full 13 membership doesn't quite fit into your budget right now, make a contribution of whatever amount you can. And remember, too, that a first-time member has all the benefits of membership for less than $1 a week. So make a commitment to 13 and its programs with a $40 contribution. And don't forget, AT&T has promised to match dollar for dollar up to $15,000, whatever contribution you make during our Hermitage intermission. So please, pick up your phone right now, make the most generous contribution you can. And now let's go back to Raphael, who has another spectacular offer to make to all of our Hermitage viewers.
That's right, Tom. Now please, have your pencil, your phone, and your credit card handy, because here it is. If you're the first to call the top number on your screen, 1-800-468-9913, and make a gift of $6,500 on any major credit card, we've got a once-in-a-lifetime thank you gift for you and a traveling companion courtesy of Finnair and Finway Tours. Take a look.
Here is an irresistible thank you package for your generous gift to 13. Be the first one right now to call 1-800-468-9913 and only 1-800-468-9913. Make a contribution of $6,500 on any major credit card, and then you could be packing your bags for a trip you'll never forget. Thanks to Finnair, the national airline of Finland, and Finway, a leader in tours to Russia, Scandinavia, the Baltics, and the rest of the new Northern Europe. You'll receive a pair of round-trip business class tickets to St. Petersburg, the home of the Hermitage Museum. Get ready to spend 4 nights in the 5-star Hotel Grand Europe, in the heart of the city of the Tsars. Your stay at this elegant and cosmopolitan hotel includes buffet breakfasts, a dinner, and a lunch. This fabulous package, valid from January the 12th through May the 10th of '96, also includes 2 guided tours through the Hermitage, a tour of St. Petersburg, and a visit to the fortress of Peter and Paul. And of course, no visit to this royal city would be complete without a pair of tickets to the legendary Mariinsky Theater. So make that call now, but you must use this toll-free number, 1-800-468-9913. And you must be the first one to join 13's Patron Network with a $6,500 contribution on any major credit card. And if you are the first, then get ready to take the trip of a lifetime as our thanks. Bon voyage and spasibo.
And now here to tell us more about that pretty incredible thank you for your $6,500 gift to 13 and the Patron Network is Allison Baird, the director of 13's Patron Network. Allison, thank you for joining us.
Thank
you. That is a pretty incredible deal. Tell us about it.
It's sensational, and we're very grateful to Finnair and Finway for donating the trip. A friend of mine went to St. Petersburg recently, and she stayed at the Hotel Grand Europe, which is the hotel featured in the offer. And she told me it is, without doubt, one of the most luxurious hotels in Europe, if not the world. So if there are viewers out there who've been thinking about going to Russia and thinking about making a gift to 13, this is a perfect opportunity to do both at once.
Well, that's the thing. It's a great deal, and at the same time, they're helping 13.
Exactly.
What could be better?
Right.
Now, tell us a little more about the Patron Network. What is it?
The Patron Network is a group of donors who care very, very deeply about the station and give us a gift of $1,000 or more annually.
So that's how you become a Patron Network member.
Exactly. You can become a patron for the first time tonight by making a $1,000 pledge. Or if you have any questions, you could call me on our Patron Network hotline at 560-2828.
560-2828.
Right.
They can call you throughout the week and leave a
Exactly.
message if you're not there.
Exactly. And of course, by giving a pledge of $6,500 tonight, you will automatically become a patron.
Now, tell us some of the benefits that you get from being a patron.
Probably the most popular benefit is unlimited use of our video lending library, which features about 800 tapes of all your favorite PBS and 13 titles. And you can take out tapes for up to 2 weeks, 4 tapes at a time, which is great with some of our PBS multi-part series if you want to catch up on those. And you also receive invitations to station luncheons, screenings, lectures, and special tours we do here at 13.
Okay, and you have dinners with people like George Page, Bill Moyer, Peter Paul, and Peter.
Personalities, exactly, throughout the year.
That's great. We can talk about a million other things, but we're out of time. But thank you very much for being here, and that's a great deal. I hope somebody can make use of it. Now we hope the response to this program helps us towards our goal of $15,000 new or 15,000 new or renewing members during this December membership campaign. So please, take a moment and join us. Believe me, this series on one of the world's great museums could only have been made for a viewer like you who expects to find it here on 13.
And our friends from AT&T agree, and that's why they're prepared to match every donation during this intermission dollar for dollar. And that's why their staff volunteers are out in force tonight to take your calls. Of course, it isn't easy to find programs like the Hermitage because it isn't easy to get them made. But for over 30 years here, we've tried to find programming that continually shapes our lives, both as individuals and as a society. Membership dollars brought this 3-part series to 13 for you. And now your support for 13 will help us bring more programs like this one to your program schedule. We'll continue our efforts on your behalf if you make a contribution to support us. That's the way our Circle of Trust operates. So please justify our trust in your good sense and express your trust in our future by making a financial commitment to 13 right now. Again, the numbers to call are 1-800-468-9913 or 1-800-272-1313. And if our lines are busy, please keep trying to get through. Thanks.
Public television has been part of the American experience for more than 30 years. And many of you have raised children or have grown up yourselves depending on 13's non-commercial quality programs. But the threat to our future is real. And the question is, have you done your part to solidify our future? If you haven't called yet, then ask yourself why. If you have made your contribution, then we thank you for taking the time and making the effort. And now, let's return to the kind of television your membership dollars are meant to support.
I am an opera singer just that.
Luciano Pavarotti was never just an opera singer. Feast on some of the greatest performances of his career in Pavarotti, My World. Only on Great Performances. Wednesday night at 8 on member-supported 13. Our lines will remain open during the program, or you can mail your check to 13, Box 1313, New York 10101.
(1764), which marks the beginning of the Hermitage, was an interesting year elsewhere in the world. In the American colonies, Brown University was founded at Providence, Rhode Island. In London, Samuel Johnson and Edward Gibbon formed the Literary Society, while at Salzburg, Austria, an 8-year-old boy, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, wrote his first symphony, and Franz Joseph Haydn of Vienna composed his 22nd, called The Philosopher. In France, Voltaire had already established his reputation as the father of the Enlightenment. In this age of great awakenings, Catherine the Great tried to import Western ideas to civilize her beloved country. Catherine had a great affinity for her grandfather-in-law, Peter the Great. Both were visionaries. Peter had wanted to modernize Russia with great infusions of Western technology, economic theory, and social custom. Catherine thought that the critical imports were ideas, whole atmospheres of philosophy and aesthetics which could, she believed, awaken Russia to the contemporary world. Catherine adroitly linked her reign to Peter the Great's by ordering an immense monument. The foundation was a 1,500-ton piece of granite from Finland. 500 men were needed to haul it ashore. In this most public statement of admiration, Catherine the Great aligned herself forever with Russia's greatest Tsar. Peter the Great lived, ruled, and died long before the Hermitage existed. Art was not a major interest, but he recognized its importance as part of the European culture he was bringing to Russia. Not a man of refined taste, the Tsar's instruction to his agents was simple: don't buy bad pictures. So, they bought him, among other things, a Rembrandt, David's Farewell to Jonathan, which is now part of the Hermitage's permanent collection. Peter acquired more than 200 paintings from dealers in Brussels and London. Most of them were Dutch and Flemish and radiated a naturalness similar in style to Van Honthorst's Christ in the Carpenter's Shop. This comfortable realism was in sharp contrast to the religious art of Russia, whose traditional form was the icon, orthodox images, beautiful and enigmatic. The great age of icons began in the 12th century. In paintings done on wood panels, the Russians portrayed themselves as smoke-eyed saints and mystics. St. John the theologian in silence. The life of Nicholas, patron saint of Russia. Mary, mother of Jesus. These figures symbolize a capacity for sorrow and suffering. They tell of a spiritual life beyond the comprehension of Western Europeans. They speak from the profound depths of the Russian soul. But Peter the Great wasn't interested in the mysticism of the Russian soul. Western European painting of earthly reality echoed his vibrant 18th century outlook, in which people, not saints, dominated the considerations of the state. This portrait of Peter the Great as a young man hangs in the Hermitage. He was determined to import much that he had encountered in his Western European travels. He created a great navy that he modeled after those he'd seen in Holland and England. And he forced men to shorten their coats and cut their beards to conform to European fashion, an order so strongly resisted that Peter finally allowed men to keep their beards if they wore a medal showing they'd paid a heavy tax. But Peter's drive to modernize went far beyond fashion. In the early 1700s, he decided to build a whole new capital city. A century later, the great epic poem, The Bronze Horseman, by Alexander Pushkin, recreated Peter's vision of what St. Petersburg would be. On a shore washed by desolate waves he stood, and he thought, from here we will outface the Swede. Despite our haughty neighbor, I shall found a city here. By nature, we are fated to cut a window through to Europe, to stand with a firm foothold on the sea. The haughty neighbor was King Charles XII of Sweden, a young man with an almost maniacal love of war. The Swedish Empire encircled the Baltic Sea, and Charles XII was determined to annex Russia. But Peter the Great faced the Swedish threat and put his firm foothold on the sea. The first structure at St. Petersburg, the fortress of Peter and Paul. While the massive and bloody Russo-Swedish War raged on, Peter threw himself into the building of a whole new city on the islands and swamps of the Neva estuary. A graceful shape began to emerge from the chaos of construction on the banks of the Neva. St. Petersburg was becoming a city of canals built on scores of marshy islands. It is a city of inordinate beauty. It's often called the Venice of the North, but it was created at an appalling cost by the savage, brilliant visionary who ordered it built as you and I would order lunch. By Peter's own estimate, 100,000 serfs and indentured craftsmen died in forced labor constructing St. Petersburg. The Tsar was everywhere, planning, supervising, demanding, exhorting. He issued an edict forbidding any building by stone anywhere in Russia except St. Petersburg, forcing every mason to come north and work on the city. Artists and artisans from all over Europe embellished new buildings with elegant decor, much of it surviving to our own time. Aristocrats were pressured into putting up great mansions and palaces in St. Petersburg. Libraries and universities opened, and great cathedrals rose into the Russian sky. By 1712, Peter was winning the war with Sweden, and so confidently moved his imperial government from Moscow to St. Petersburg. It remained the capital of Russia for more than 200 years. The Tsar's summer palace along the Neva, a cottage in the Dutch style, epitomized his taste for things Western. He regarded St. Petersburg itself as his window on the West, an aperture through which European ideas could flow. He knew that a window alone couldn't change anything as frozen in custom and ignorance as Russia. When Peter wasn't putting down rebellions, fighting wars against the Swedes and the Turks, or building cities, he addressed himself to the problem of trying to haul his country into the modern world of the 18th century. Of this accomplishment, he said, "We have lifted the curtain drawn in front of our country's curiosity, which deprived it of communication with the whole world." The man who did this bust of Peter the Great was an Italian sculptor named Carlo Rastrelli, whose son Francesco designed the Winter Palace for Peter's successor, his daughter Elizabeth. Peter the Great did not live to see the construction of this splendid home of the Tsars or the Hermitage which was added to it. But he did live long enough to see a Baroque metropolis rise on the banks of the Neva. Peter the Great died in his city in 1725. He was 53 years old. At the end, he said, "I hope God will forgive my many sins because of the good I have tried to do for my people." By 1782, the Winter Palace had been the home of Catherine the Great for 20 years. The Hermitage, added on a dozen years before, was bursting at the seams with art. 2 more Hermitage buildings were about to be constructed. Catherine the Great was halfway through her long reign. Peter the Great had died 57 years before. On her tribute to him, the statue of a great bronze horseman, she had a motto carved in both Russian and Latin: Peter first, Catherine second. She had kept Peter's window on the west open, and through it flowed the great art of Europe. These were her monuments. Her Rembrandts. Rubens. Her Lottos. Beyond images, Catherine also collected ideas, 32,000 volumes of them, making the library an integral part of the Hermitage. Catherine's collecting was also what we would call today a political statement. She was trying to associate herself and her country with the Enlightenment, the most important intellectual movement to sweep Europe since the Reformation. It believed in the infinite possibilities of science and human reason. The Enlightenment put its faith in progress and the perfectibility of all things. Its prophets and spokesmen were the so-called philosophes of France.
The novelist and philosopher of the Enlightenment, François-Marie Arouet, known to history as Voltaire, had become the intellectual superstar of Europe. He was a somewhat contradictory man, assaulting monarchies with witty contempt while allowing himself to be courted by kings, emperors, and the Tsarina of Russia. Catherine the Great's correspondence with Voltaire, affectionate, bantering, frequently profound, lasted for the rest of his life. She formed a friendship with another of France's so-called philosophes, Denis Diderot. He was a celebrated playwright and encyclopedist, and he became one of Catherine's important advisors on the acquisition of art. Titian's Danae was among 600 paintings Diderot got in 1772 from the private collection of the treasurer of France, Pierre Crozat. It was Catherine's greatest coup. It also included Rembrandt's Holy Family. The Crozat pictures were regarded as one of the finest of all French collections. The purchase caused an outbreak of indignation in France. Diderot wrote to a friend in St. Petersburg, "I am the object of absolute, genuine public hatred because I'm sending you paintings. The collectors, the artists, and the rich are all up in arms. I'm taking absolutely no notice." The 600 Crozat paintings traveled from France to St. Petersburg by ship. These great masterworks, among them Van Dyck's self-portrait, enormously enhanced the reputation of Catherine's collection. Another important edition that Diderot bought directly from the artist is Le Paralytique by Jean-Baptiste Greuze. Diderot praised it as an outstanding example of moral painting. The phrase means art which elevates the drama of ordinary life to the status of heroic tragedy. Here, a paralyzed old man is secure in the care and love of his family, his reward for dedicating himself to their well-being. While Catherine the Great was engaged in art collecting and intellectual correspondence with the philosophes of France, she was still a working empress. She replied to one of her art advisors who complained that she was not paying enough attention to her collecting.
To deal properly with the fine arts, one must have fewer interruptions than we have had in the last 6 weeks.
The interruptions included war with Turkey and the annexation of parts of Poland. British cartoonists saw a gluttonous Catherine devouring one country after another. In 1774, fresh from her imperial successes, Catherine invited Diderot to St. Petersburg. Every afternoon, the Tsarina received the French philosopher in her study for what she called a little hour. Diderot tended to lecture her. He was a man of erupting enthusiasms who often made his points by jabbing his listeners with his forefinger. A startled Catherine wrote to a friend in Paris,
"Your Diderot is a very extraordinary man. I cannot get out of my conversations with him without having my thighs bruised and black and blue. I have been obliged to put a table between him and me to shelter myself and my limbs from his gesticulation."
But he went too far when he referred to Russian serfs as slaves.
There are no slaves in Russia, only peasants attached to the land. I know of no country where the worker loves his land and his home more than in Russia.
There seems to have been a pattern in the reigns of several great Russian autocrats. They began as liberal reformers. They end as bitter reactionaries. Catherine the Great's 34 years on the throne of Russia were a classic playout of that pattern. She composed a document which she called her Nakaz, or Great Instruction. It's Catherine's vision of the ideal Russian state, humane, probably rid of the curse of serfdom, but still run by an autocrat. She thought that the country was too vast and diverse to be controlled by any less absolute form of government.
The Russian landscape appears tranquil in these sketches commissioned by Catherine, but idyllic pastoral scenes belied the squalid reality of most Russian lives. 1/3 of all the people were serfs, peasants who were the property of landholders, industrial entrepreneurs, or the government. Serf owners paid the bulk of Russia's taxes, pressuring their human possessions to work harder as compensation. The aristocracy paid no taxes at all. In 1773, a Don Cossack named Emelian Pugachev led a massive uprising of Turks, Tatars, and Cossacks. For 2 years, estates were pillaged and aristocrats were murdered before Catherine's army finally crushed the revolt. The first mass popular rebellion in Russian history was over. In the midst of all these alarms and crises, Denis Diderot went right on lecturing Catherine, preaching liberalism and enlightenment. She found him increasingly irrelevant.
You work only on paper, which accepts anything, is smooth, flexible, and offers no obstacles either to your imagination or to your pen. While I, poor Empress, work on human skin, which is far more sensitive and touchy.
When Diderot's fellow philosopher, Voltaire, was advanced in years and in declining health, he wrote to Catherine, hoping for an invitation to visit St. Petersburg.
Catherine had learned, perhaps, that friendships with French philosophers are best conducted from afar. She was an adroit politician who knew how to say no with great charm.
I know you are in delicate health. I admire your courage, but I should be inconsolable if you were to suffer from the effort. Neither myself nor Europe would forgive me.
She was, however, genuinely saddened by Voltaire's death in 1778.
He is my master. It was he, or rather his writings, who formed my mind. If possible, buy his library and his papers, including his letters.
Voltaire's library was packed up and shipped to the Hermitage, along with 100 copies of his complete works, which Catherine had ordered.
I want them to be studied and learned by heart. They will form citizens, geniuses, heroes, and authors, and will foster 1,000 talents.
The 18th century was slipping away. Catherine and her closest counselors, many of them former lovers who'd remained her friends and colleagues, fought wars against the Ottoman Empire, annexed parts of Poland and the Crimea, improved education and local government, and above all, they made Russia a major diplomatic player in Europe.
Catherine was painted in vigorous middle age. About the same time, a French visitor wrote of the strong impression the Empress made at the height of her powers. I've said that she was short, yet on days when she appeared in state, everything about her, head held high, the eagle eyes, the assured bearing that comes with the habit of command, was so majestic that she seemed to rule the world. In between the grand receptions for visiting ambassadors and the increasing demands of matters of state, Catherine still took time to work on her collection of art. In 1779, her principal art advisor, Baron Melchior von Grimm, learned that yet another collection, belonging to a French Count Baudouin, was for sale. It consisted of 19 pictures. 8 of them were Rembrandt's. It took von Grimm 5 years to persuade Catherine to buy them. She finally gave in with an impish flash of imperial wit.
The world is a strange place, and the number of happy people is very small. I can see that Monsieur le Comte Baudouin is not going to be happy until he sells his collection. And it appears that I am destined to make him happy.
Accumulated over 30 years, Catherine the Great's collection of pictures, which were the basis of the Hermitage, surpassed what the Louvre in Paris had collected over 4 centuries. By the mid-1780s, Catherine had become bored with art collecting. Drama became her new passion. She had this exquisite little theater built at the far end of the Hermitage. The decor was in the high neoclassical style. The seating was limited. The stage was designed to accommodate operas as well as plays. Catherine had always loved the theater. She wrote plays and the libretti for 5 operas, all featuring prominent figures from Russian history. The years were closing on her. Catherine was moving into old age, preparing to become a magnificent memory. In 1788, she composed an epitaph for herself.
When she ascended to the throne of Russia, she wished to do good and tried to bring happiness, freedom, and prosperity to her subjects. She forgave easily and hated no one. She was good-natured and easygoing. She had a cheerful temperament, Republican sentiments, and a kind heart. She had friends. Work was easy for her. She loved sociability and the arts.
This little theater seems to have been her life's last escape. Russia and the world were too much with her. As she wrote and watched plays here, the old monarchies of Europe were being shaken to their foundations. The French Revolution terrified Catherine. When, in 1793, the news of Louis XVI's execution by the mobs of Paris reached St. Petersburg, she was anguished and she was outraged.
The very name of France should be exterminated. Equality is a monster.
She turned away from her own enlightened instincts. She repudiated her old friends, the philosophes. She died in 1796.
In just a few minutes, we'll continue our odyssey through Russian history with the second chapter in our story of the Hermitage. But right now, we ask you to take a moment to call our toll-free line, 1-800-468-9913 or 1-800-272-1313. And tell us with your commitment of support that this is the kind of programming you want to see more of on 13. Your contribution will also remind our government leaders, both in Washington and in Albany, that 13 is an absolutely essential part of your community's educational life and certainly deserving of government support as well. Now, a reminder, too, that this entire 3-part story of the Hermitage can be yours for a membership contribution of $250. We do have many ways to thank you for whatever membership level you choose. And, of course, you can charge your financial gift on any major credit card. Just have your card with you when you go to your phone.
a presentation of South Carolina ETV. This program is made possible by a grant from the American Friends of the State Hermitage Museum, Incorporated. Additional funds were provided by the Robinson Foundation.
We would love to hear from you as we continue the most important fundraising drive of our winter season. So please give us a call on our toll-free toll line and be as generous as you possibly can. Our programs like the Hermitage and 13's Continued Excellence are in your hands. Make that call.
Yes, I am.
Now, it's really inspiring to be able to turn on your television and find a program where you can admire great art and the sweep of history. It's all here in this magnificent series on the Hermitage, and there's much more to come. But if you're ready to support 13 now, and if you're ready to cast your vote for a more important series like this one, then call 1-800-468-9913 or 1-800-272-1313 and let yourself be heard. And because this broadcast is such a splendid event, staff volunteers from AT&T have come out not only to take your call, but to challenge you to call and make your contribution tonight. AT&T is prepared to match your gift dollar for dollar up to $15,000. So make that call now and double your gift to 13.
I'd like to share some very exciting news with you. In our last break, we had an offer for a $6,500 trip to the Hermitage and to St. Petersburg, and 6 people have called in to be put in line for this. And right now, we're trying to ascertain which one of these was actually the first call. So hopefully later in the evening, we'll be able to tell you who the winner of that particular pledge bonus is. And right now, we'd like to take a moment to welcome Danny Wilson to our studio, and we're very happy and proud to have you. Danny is the producer of this magnificent 3-part series. It's wonderful to have you. Congratulations. We're heaping encomiums. I've been dying to use that expression. It's just such a wonderful show, so beautifully done.
That's nice to hear, and it's awfully nice to be here. It's nice to be here in the studio and to help you encourage everybody who's watching to sign up and pledge. It's really very important now that we do this. After all, New York is Connecticut and New Jersey. This is the cultural capital of the world, and let's help make Channel 13 the best station in the United States.
Thanks a lot, Danny. Danny will be back in just a moment to talk more about the program, but first, we have some more thank you gifts when you call right now and join 13 as a member. For a contribution of $100, we'll send you the IBM PC-compatible CD-ROM Introduction to the Hermitage. This disc will lead you at your own pace through the legendary galleries of the Hermitage, where great masterpieces will be on permanent exhibit just for you. For a contribution of $150, Hidden Treasures Revealed will be our thanks for that generous pledge. This would be the perfect gift for the art lover in your life, and certainly a fine addition to your own personal library of art history. And again, for a gift of $250 or more, we'll thank you with all 3 Hermitage programs in a boxed set of 3 VHS tapes. It's the ideal way to enjoy this monumental series again and again.
And feel free to charge your contribution on any major credit card. Just have your favorite card handy when you reach for your phone. Also, please remember that the call is on us. The toll-free number is 1-800-468-9913 or 1-800-272-1313. Be as generous as you can when you make your contribution. The important thing, though, is that you express your support for this kind of television in the way that's most appropriate to you. If you wish to make a smaller donation to 13, we welcome your support in any amount. If you're already a member, we're also asking you to consider making an additional contribution. Your generous support has helped us in the past. Your additional gift will help us now and will underscore the importance of public television. It tells our critics you care and care deeply about the survival of this important television resource. And it also tells our friends at AT&T that you're ready to have them double your gift to 13 during this intermission.
Your call matters more than ever right now, because it's the strongest answer we can muster in response to those who say that public television has had its day, and that public funding for 13 and our sister stations should be ended, if not right away, at least at some time in the near future. And to talk about that and the series we're watching right now is Danny Wilson, who is the producer of this magnificent story of the Hermitage. Again, it's wonderful to have you with us tonight. How did this happen? How did the idea come about to do this wonderful show?
Well, it happened because at the time, back in 1994, when the program was made, actually 92, I was working for the Monitor Channel as a consultant and as a producer doing documentaries for them. And we decided to embark on a very ambitious project, and we were going to do a series of great museums around the world.
I see.
And we selected the Hermitage to be the first pilot, if you will, of the series. And we decided that we would do history as well as art and combine the two.
And I wanted to compliment you again on that, because you were saying that you and Rod McLeish really collaborated in this and were able to tell the history of Russia through the art of the Hermitage.
Well, I felt very strongly that if you're going to ask a viewer to sit down and give you 3 hours of time, you had better make a program that really does more than just show art, but really relates it to the environment in which it was originally made. And we felt the Hermitage, with the richness of the history of Russia, was an ideal way to do that.
And it's found its way to us here in public television, for which we're very grateful. How has the response been to the show?
The response has been magnificent. I am just delighted by the response. We find that people not only enjoy the art, they enjoy the history, and they enjoy the fact of that it's exciting, that it is informative, and it's entertaining.
And I understand that you also have a project, which I don't really want to talk about too much right now, but maybe you can just give us a couple of hints.
We are going to do a project on the Romanovs, and we have official access to the entire Russian archive in Moscow that has every letter, every diary, and every photograph that was 70,000 photographs that has ever taken.
Sounds very exciting.
That we're going to be doing for public
And with
television.
our viewers' support, hopefully it will be here on 13 in a year or two.
Let's hope so.
Okay. Danny will be back with us a little later tonight to remind you just how important your support is to projects like these. If they are to find their way to your home, we really need to hear from you right now. We offer programs that treat you as a person of endless curiosity. When you turn to 13, you don't pay per view, but we do count on you to voluntarily put your money where your mind is. Now, this is one of those times, so please call right now. Become a member of 13 with the most generous contribution you can possibly make.
Your support helps us bring something to television that you wouldn't ordinarily see. So please, call now. Again, the toll-free numbers are 1-800-468-9913 or 1-800-272-1313. And now, here's a preview of what's coming up in the weeks and months ahead. Take a look.
We are as boundless as your world, as diverse as your nation, as near as your neighborhood. We're 13. We'll bring you visions of yesterday and glimpses of your future, tragedies that brought the nation together and the turmoil that tore it apart, the world we know and worlds we can't even imagine. Maestros of music, masters of movie making, and a mistress of mystery. The villains you love to hate, voyages you love to take. We'll cover the decisions that matter and bring you the news you need to make decisions of your own. So come and be dazzled, be daring, be delighted. Open your eyes to a world of television that makes a world of difference. If 13 doesn't do it, who will?
This program is made possible by a grant from the American Friends of the State Hermitage Museum, Incorporated. Additional funds were provided by the Robinson Foundation. The Hermitage, Palace of the Russian Tsars, center of St. Petersburg's art and culture. It has withstood centuries of the wrenching violence of Russia's history. In 1700, Peter the Great built a new capital city, St. Petersburg, and opened Russia to the culture and commerce of Western Europe. When Catherine the Great came to power in 1762, she amassed an enormous body of European masterworks for the Winter Palace of the Tsars. Over time, the size and variety of its collections grew to rank among those of the world's great museums. From Rembrandts to Picassos, from Van Dycks to Matisses, from historic icons of the Russian Orthodox Church to artifacts of the Tsars. This monument to culture means more to the Russian people than just a collection of art. It is an embodiment of their heritage, a link to their very own past. It is a repository of pride and accomplishment. It is their Hermitage.
By the end of the 18th century, the Hermitage was regarded as one of the most important museums in Europe, though most of the public, most of the time, had no access to its 2,658 pictures.
In her collection, Catherine had more French art than any other. When she bought paintings such as Chardin's Attributes of the Arts, she hoped to bring the spirit of the 18th century Enlightenment into Russia. Catherine was profoundly influenced by French philosophers such as Voltaire in conceiving of a new Russian state. She spoke and wrote French as her first language. The French playwright, novelist, and encyclopedist Denis Diderot spent a winter in St. Petersburg talking to Catherine about the intellectual components of the good society. Just as the mythic sculptor Pygmalion created a statue of Galatea which came to life, so France brought the inspiration of the Enlightenment to the ruling intellect of Russia. The rendering of the Pygmalion legend by François Boucher was one of the jewels of Catherine's collection. Most particularly, Catherine relied on French art and French philosophy to modernize her court and her country. After her death, the whirlwind of revolution carried Napoleon into power and created a new order in France.
Exchanges of pleasantry between the French and the Russians were about to end. Catherine had been succeeded by her son, Tsar Paul I. Like his father, Paul was neurotic and capricious.
Paul detested his mother, Catherine the Great. The feeling was mutual. Paul was so delighted at Catherine's death that he decorated the messenger who brought him the news. He hated Catherine's Winter Palace. The new Tsar took 700 paintings out of it, added a few distinguished purchases of his own, and took up residence elsewhere. A Russian artist of the day produced a rather unflattering caricature of Paul. For this one drawing, the artist was banished to Siberia for the rest of his life. Clearly, Paul I was unbalanced. In 1801, a group of noblemen decided to depose him. His son, who would succeed Paul as Tsar Alexander I, was assured that his father's life would be spared. Alexander had already said, "If and when my own turn comes, I shall have to dedicate myself to my country and never let it become again a toy in a madman's hands." But the plotters didn't keep their promise. The mad Tsar Paul was strangled in the process of removing him. Alexander I ascended the Russian imperial throne with a burden of guilt heavier than the crown which symbolized his autocracy. Alexander was an interesting combination of character traits. He was deeply religious, charming, devious, and dutiful. He increased Russia's military power, enacted liberal reforms, and became one of the more adroit diplomats in Europe. He needed all the diplomatic and military skill he could muster. This Hermitage Gallery of Heroes was built to commemorate the most traumatic and glorious event in 19th century Russian history, the War of 1812. The hall is dominated at the far end by an equestrian portrait of Alexander I. Here, he is enshrined as his country's hero and savior. He won the gratitude and adulation of Western Europe for turning back what had seemed to be an unopposable tide of conquest. In the summer of 1812, Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Russia. That great clash at arms, known in this country's history as the War of the Fatherland, was underway. An immense painting of the Battle of Borodino hangs in this same Hermitage Gallery. Borodino was fought on September 7, 1812. It was the first great artillery battle of modern history. It was also a fearful carnage. 70,000 French and Russian troops were slaughtered. When it was over, Napoleon said, "The French showed themselves worthy of victory, and the Russians of being invincible." The Russian commanders began a long tactical retreat, luring Napoleon toward Moscow. When the French got there, they found the great heartland city of Russia almost deserted and in flames. The Russians were willing to destroy Moscow rather than let it fall into the hands of foreign invaders. Too late, Bonaparte realized that in capturing Moscow, he had captured nothing. The oppressed Russian people stood by their Tsar. Food was getting scarce. Winter was coming on. On the other side of the Hermitage Gallery, another painting records the devastating French retreat. Russian armies and bands of Cossacks, including Mongols, pursued them, harassing and butchering. More than 90% of Napoleon's troops died in one of the most humiliating military defeats in history. The Russians followed Napoleon's army into France and deposed him. Alexander I entered Paris in triumph. Many Russian officers lingered in France for several years, indulging themselves in the pleasures of Paris while simultaneously absorbing the liberal political ideas of Western Europe. All of Paris was charmed by the handsome Tsar. Alexander became a friend of Napoleon Bonaparte's first wife, the Empress Josephine. Her portrait by François Pascal Gérard hangs in the Hermitage. Josephine and Alexander discovered a common interest in art. They spent many hours discussing her great collection of paintings, which Napoleon had looted from Germany. Josephine owned the Gonzaga cameo, one of the largest in the world. It dates to the 3rd century BC and shows the Egyptian pharaoh Ptolemy II and his wife. Napoleon gave it to Josephine, and she in turn presented it to Alexander I. Bernardino Luini's St. Catherine was among the 118 paintings in Josephine's collection. When she died, shortly after Alexander left Paris, he bought her pictures as a kindness to her impoverished family. They included Giovanni Biliverte's The Angel Departing from Tobias. Alexander also expanded the Hermitage's collection of Spanish art. The Girlhood of the Virgin by Francisco de Zubarán was among 15 Spanish masterpieces bought by the Tsar. Alexander also acquired one of Caravaggio's finest pictures, The Lute Player. It was painted in 1596 when Caravaggio was only 19 years old. It was the painter's favorite of his own work. Later, one of the most vivid and idealized portraits of Napoleon Bonaparte by Antoine Jean Gros came to the Hermitage. Napoleon's end began in Russia, but Russia caught a virus as a result of the French invasion. Many of Tsar Alexander's officers returned home infected by Western political ideals, government by consent instead of autocracy, the rights of man, which in Russian terms translated into demands for the emancipation of the serfs. Many of the officers who had returned from France formed secret societies. They talked incessantly about reforming Russia, but took little action for years. 19th century Russian history was dominated by a conflict between reformers and the entrenched power of the monarchy. The reformers wanted an end to serfdom, and they wanted to establish a constitutional government. St. Petersburg, home of the Hermitage, was not only the political capital of Russia in the early 19th century, it had become the literary and artistic headquarters as well. But Russian society as a whole was mired in serfdom and class rigidity. Western Europe, on the other hand, had seized upon the Enlightenment ideals of equality and the innate rights of man. There was a heady spirit of challenge in the Western air. Beethoven produced his great libertarian opera Fidelio. Schiller wrote the epic anti-tyranny poem Wilhelm Tell. In 1814, Francis Scott Key set down the lyrics of what was to become the American national anthem. Simon Bolivar established an independent Venezuela in 1817. And 6 years later, the United States proclaimed the Monroe Doctrine, which warned the old monarchies of Europe not to interfere in the Western Hemisphere. In Russia, however, the emancipation of the serfs was decades away. the institution of Tsardom was about to take an autocratic turn for the worse. In November 1825, Alexander I died, or disappeared under mysterious circumstances. A persistent legend says he didn't die at all, but put aside his robes of state and became a religious hermit. When the Soviet authorities opened his tomb in 1926, it was empty. Alexander's next youngest brother, Prince Constantine, refused the throne. The succession then produced a third brother, Nicholas I. He was an army engineer by profession, a reactionary by inclination, and an autocrat in political practice. He announced, "I cannot permit that any individual should dare defy my wishes. The slightest infringement will be punished with all the force of the law. No pardon will be granted." The army officers who'd been talking about political reform for years were suddenly galvanized into action. On December 26th, a group of officers assembled 3,000 soldiers in a square near the Winter Palace. Their demands were modest: a constitutional monarchy and an end to serfdom. To the new Tsar, that was wild-eyed radicalism. After a day-long standoff, someone fired a shot and the tension erupted. The forces of the reformers were routed. And the revolt was over. The Decembrists, as history calls them, were men of noble aims, but they were hopelessly inept as plotters against the entrenched power of the Tsar. Imperial Russia's first attempt to reform itself had ended in blood and disappointment. The ringleaders were tried in the Winter Palace and found guilty. 5 of the Decembrist officers were hanged in the fortress of Peter and Paul, directly across the river from the imperial residence. And more than 100 others were exiled to Siberia, including Nikolai Bestushev, an artist and writer, as well as a naval officer, who documented the lives and deprivations of the Decembrists in exile. His self-portrait hangs in the Hermitage. Tsar Nicholas regarded himself as a victim of the whole affair. He wrote a long and petulant letter to his mother. "My dear and good Mama, I feel extreme anguish, at the same time gratitude to God, who has allowed me to bring this horrible case to an end. Only the idea of a terrible duty enables me to endure such martyrdom." Nicholas I's autocratic, stubborn instincts hardened during his 30 years of rule. Britain's young Queen Victoria was struck by the Tsar's unbending nature and wrote of his state visit to England. He is stern and severe, with fixed principles of duty which nothing on earth will make him change. He is sincere, I'm certain, even in his most despotic acts, from a sense that it's the only way to govern. For all that, Nicholas did more for the Hermitage than any Russian ruler since Catherine the Great. He lavished money and attention on the museum. And he admitted select echelons of the public for the first time. Those who got in had to apply far in advance and wear evening clothes on the day of their visit. Faces from the past stared down at them, from the masterworks of Titian. 16th century Dutch musketeers of 1532, painted by Dirk Jacobs. And from 1495, St. Bavo by Geertken tot Sint-Jans. (1825). 61 years have passed since Catherine the Great bought her first collection of pictures. Rebellions, one violent and massive, one brief and well-intentioned, have troubled the Russian air. The Hermitage has outlived the intention of its founder and builders. It is not a statement of Russia's place in the European scheme of things. It's a monument to its own contents,
the creative genius of centuries and nations. It's taken on a life of its own, which will continue undisturbed by the passage of mere history which lies ahead. Nicholas I's obsession with order expressed itself in the pleasure he took in military precision. He loved to personally drill his troops. Nicholas expected the same order and precision in the operation of the Hermitage. Someone who worked at the museum wrote a description of the Tsar as self-appointed curator. He imagined himself to be a special expert in everything, who never doubted himself in anything, a person of narrow thoughts and tastes. Writers, as well as artists in the mid-19th century, found much to inspire them once the public was admitted to the Hermitage. The poet Alexander Pushkin, who both charmed and quarreled with Nicholas I, read deeply in the library of Voltaire, which Catherine the Great had bought when the philosopher died. Pushkin's notebooks were filled with Voltaire's somewhat acerbic epigrams and theories about the virtues of civil liberty and social equality. Nicholas obviously did not share Pushkin's admiration. The sight of Houdon's statue of the seated Voltaire enraged him. "Destroy this old monkey," he roared. The museum staff quickly removed the marble portrait of Voltaire to a place where the Tsar couldn't see it. (1837), disaster. A catastrophic fire destroyed the 1,000 rooms of the Winter Palace. The enormous structure took 2 days to burn. At the far end of the Winter Palace, the bulk of the Hermitage galleries and their contents were saved, thanks to heroic efforts by firemen, soldiers, and the museum staff. Tsar Nicholas ordered the palace rebuilt and ready for imperial occupancy within a year. The deadline was almost met. Within 15 months, the palace was restored and made even grander than before. Catherine the Great had believed that visual splendor was a demonstration of political and imperial power. In his own way, Nicholas agreed with her, or at least decided to emulate her. He had plans drawn up for an addition to the Hermitage, his addition, erected to the greater glory of Nicholas I. It was designed by the German architect Leo von Klenze, who had built celebrated museums in Munich. As well as extolling himself in his reign, Nicholas intended his addition to the Hermitage to be the finest showcase for art in Europe. This room, and others similar to it, built by Nicholas I, are unlike anything we've seen up to now. This is not an opulent pleasure dome. The new Hermitage was built expressly as a museum, an art gallery. Its sole purpose is to show pictures. And in its construction and design, Nicholas spared no expense. The galleries of Nicholas's new addition were designed to accommodate pictures already in the Hermitage collection, some of them enormous.
The great rooms held paintings like Canaletto's reception of the French ambassador in Venice. And Luca Giordano's Mourning. Depicting the burial of Jesus. The statuary was also placed with exacting care.
This collection of Roman sculpture is on display in a room created especially for it. An environment tailored to the works of art it contains.
The architect von Klenze gave prominence to the white sculpture by using contrasting walls of red and green marble. The finest sculpture from all the royal palaces was assembled here in one grand collection, which included a first-century Roman version of the Greek goddess of love, Aphrodite. It's also known as the Tauride Venus and was given to Peter the Great by Pope Clement XI.
If you'd like to be able to watch this series again without waiting for it to be rebroadcast, you can have the entire three-part series on VHS for yourself. It's our thanks when you call right now and become a 13 member with a contribution of $250 or more. And for a gift of $100, we'll send you the CD-ROM Introduction to the Hermitage. This disc is IBM compatible and it's filled with images from the world's great art assembled over the centuries by the Tsars and Commissars of Russia. Or make a membership commitment of $150 for Hidden Treasures Revealed, the story of great works of art that were thought to be lost but which actually survived the Second World War in the safety of the Hermitage. This volume is a major artistic achievement and one that anyone who is interested in the history of Western art is sure to value. It's our thanks for your $150 gift at 13 right now. So go to your phone and make that toll-free call. The numbers are 1-800-468-9913 or 1-800-272-1313. Show your appreciation to 13 for this extraordinary broadcast with the most generous contribution you can make. Tom?
Thanks, Raphael. A reminder, too, that AT&T, one of the great corporate friends of 13, is challenging you tonight to help match its $15,000 gift to the station. For every dollar you contribute to 13, AT&T will add one of its own. And a lot of AT&T staffers have come down to our studio to hear from you personally throughout the entire broadcast of the Hermitage. So don't let them down. Now, again, the numbers to call are 1-800-468-9913 or 1-800-272-1313. Now, if you're able to make a more generous contribution, then have your credit card handy for this special concert bonus. Pledge $300 for a pair of tickets for a gala night at Town Hall. Take a look.
Oh, that's a good pledge.
Hello, I'm Thomas Hampson, here with an invitation to a once-in-a-lifetime gala performance which will explore the roots of American melody from the era of Stephen Foster through to Leonard Bernstein. I've invited several of my good friends to join me, including Dawn Upshaw, Frederica von Stade, Harlan Blackwell, Jerry Hadley, John Browning, Craig Rutenberg, and the J. Unger Trio. Call us, register a pledge, and attend the January 7th taping of a great performances special. A pair of choice seats for I Hear America Singing is our thanks to you for your credit card-only pledge of $300 right now. Additional seats are available for $150 each. I look forward to seeing you at this truly memorable event.
Now, that's certainly going to be a musical night to look forward to, so ask for those bonus tickets while they last. Remember, too, that whatever the value of the contribution you make, your decision to support 13 is multiplied by our urgent need for viewer support. If you're already a member, please make an additional gift. And if you're not able to join us as a full member right now, then at least make a donation of any amount you can. Help will come at a critical time when national and local governments are still debating the need for the existence of public television. So we need to hear from you tonight.
Absolutely right, Raphael. No one likes everything on public television. In fact, some people still want to end public funding for 13 and public broadcasting altogether. Now, if that were to happen, public broadcasting would either cease to exist or change beyond all recognition. What you do right now has a real and practical impact on our future. Your commitment to 13 is the strongest answer we can make to our critics. It's the strongest proof that people want 13 in their homes. So are you willing to reach into your pocket to help keep us going?
Well, we certainly hope so. And with us again is someone who has been listening closely to the critics of public broadcasting in Congress and elsewhere. Danny Wilson is the producer of The Hermitage. We're pleased that he could join us for this broadcast. Danny, thank you. And I should add that you came from L.A. just to be here with us, and we really appreciate that.
I'm delighted to do it, and I think it's very important. After all, when you analyze the name public broadcasting, it's the public. It's you, it's me, it's everybody out there, and all of you out there, and we've got to support it.
Now, do you think that public broadcasting is the last place for a series, a program like the one you're doing?
I would say it is the last place. I think it's the logical place, and I think in today's climate, it really is the last place. I think that it's public broadcasting's kind of responsibility is to programming like this, and there is a large number, a large number of viewers throughout the United States that want programming like this that couldn't have it on the commercial venues. They just won't, they're just not about to do it.
If there wasn't money, if public broadcasting couldn't pay for or help produce these programs like yours, would they be able to be done?
It's highly doubtful. Highly doubtful. Really? I think that, you know, I think there are some fine programs that are done on some of the cable channels and on some of the networks. But I think that the viewer support for public broadcasting is that base core support that allows people in Washington to get the message that the public does want this kind of programming, and consequently, when the public supports it, Congress starts supporting it.
In 30 seconds, could you tell the people out there who are watching this program, loving it, but have not yet joined 13, what they should do, why they should join?
Well, I would say to you, it's your responsibility if you want programming like this. If you're going to watch it, somewhere along the line, you got to help support it. And I think it's all of our responsibilities to support programming like this and the other fine programming that's on Channel 13 and on the PBS system.
Danny, thank you very much for joining us today, and good luck on your the projects that you're working on now.
Thanks.
We really
very
appreciate
much.
it. And now, back to Tom.
You know, there's still time to make your contribution before we go back to the Hermitage. So please, if you haven't made your call yet, get to your phone right away. And please be as generous as you possibly can. Why not watch the rest of this special broadcast on the Hermitage as a member and supporter of 13? Without your help, the things that we want to do may not get done here. And if we don't do them, then who will? And remember, our corporate friends at AT&T are still here, and they're prepared to match your contribution dollar for dollar. So please pick up your phone, join 13 right now as a member, or give us whatever amount you can afford to contribute to hold on to the best television that your money can buy. Thanks.
In a time when issues and events crowd our lives and personal concerns cloud our vision, public television reminds us that our world remains a place of endless wonder. That nature's not something outside of ourselves, but a part of who we are, how we live and learn. And public television's unparalleled lineup of science and nature programs gives every American the chance to celebrate the great spectacle of life on Earth, beneath the sea, and beyond the stars.
I think the first encounter with Jupiter really shocked a lot of people.
All we can say now is, wow, what a way to leave the solar system.
From the smallest molecule to the vastness of space, everything and every place on Earth and beyond is within your reach on public television.
And we will be back again at the conclusion of this chapter on the story of the Hermitage with a descendant of one of the aristocratic families of the Tsarist court. And we hope you'll welcome him by being a brand new 13 member. In the meantime, let's return to the Hermitage, a Russian Odyssey, and admire the great collection of art assembled by the Tsars and the great families of Imperial Russia.
Nicholas I was a mixed blessing for the Hermitage. He meddled in every aspect of the great collections, even redesigning the guards' uniforms. This deplorable Tsar imposed his own taste, getting rid of pictures he didn't like. The most prominent targets of Nicholas's displeasure were the works of Rembrandt. Dutch art reached one of its sublime heights in the work of Rembrandt van Rijn. He was born in 1606 and died in 1669. He was a master draftsman, colorist, and craftsman of light, as in his breathtaking Descent from the Cross. Few of his contemporaries could match Rembrandt's power as a storyteller. His themes were mainly biblical, as in his Parable of the Laborers in the Vineyard. But to make his characters more real, Rembrandt placed them in settings familiar to 17th century Holland. The Holy Family is decidedly Dutch. Joseph works at his carpentry, while Mary rocks the baby Jesus in an ordinary wicker cradle. The Return of the Prodigal Son was painted as Rembrandt was going blind. Yet he was able to convey a powerful interplay of characters and ideas. He placed the son who had stayed home to one side, watching in dismay, while the prodigal son, returning in shame, still receives his father's love and blessing. Rembrandt was not a portrait painter, a renderer of likenesses for the mighty. Rather, he was a portrayer of the human condition in all of its seasons. When Nicholas I came to power, the Hermitage owned 54 paintings by Rembrandt, more than any other museum in the world. But the Tsar, in a characteristic fit of poor judgment, ordered a majority of them sold, leaving the Hermitage with 25 Rembrandt paintings, still more than any other museum in the world. In this drastic pruning and purging carried out by Nicholas I, 1,219 works were banished, slightly more than a quarter of the entire collection of paintings. The Hermitage curators and staff watched in helpless despair as the blundering Tsar got rid of masterpieces at a fraction of their value. The Curing of Bartimaeus by Lucas van Leyden, a favorite of Catherine the Great, was sold for a mere 30 rubles in 1854. In 1885, the museum had to pay 8,000 rubles to get it back. Nicholas's repressive hand touched every part of Russia's intellectual, creative, and political life. There was absolute press censorship, and no opposition was tolerated. The Tsar's police became a ubiquitous presence in Russia. Its notorious Third Section spied on intellectuals, teachers, anyone who might commit the sin of independent thinking. People who disagreed with the Tsar were frequently declared insane and locked up. Nicholas I died in 1855. He's a bit of a contradiction. He did build this beautiful new Hermitage, but his order-obsessed mind and ossified rule planted the grapes of Russian wrath. The history that came after him was violent. Nicholas was succeeded by his son, Alexander II. His coronation was a time of rejoicing, as much perhaps over the ending of an old Tsar's dismal rule as the coming of a new ruler about whom little was known. Alexander II turned out to be the exact opposite of his father, an open, liberal-minded reformer. He was the most progressive ruler in the history of Imperial Russia. He had to rule within severe limitations imposed upon him by law, Russian inertia, and history. But he improved whatever was susceptible to improvement, including the administration of the Hermitage. Alexander appointed an historian named Gdyonev as director of the museum, and he made two important purchases, even though the rate of acquisition for the Hermitage was slowing. One of them was Leonardo da Vinci's Lita Madonna. Da Vinci completed it in 1491. It epitomizes the essence of the Renaissance, a marriage of the spiritual and the physical. The other acquisition, Raphael's Conestabile Madonna, was painted in 1502 when the artist was 19, and it's still in Raphael's original frame. The new museum director, Stepan Gdyonev, set up an archaeological commission. Excavations in southern Russia paid off in Scythian gold. Magnificent ornaments of a pre-Russian tribe. The Scythians were a fierce, nomadic people who, 8 centuries before the birth of Christ, controlled vast areas of what is now southern Russia. This ornament, made in the 6th century BC, was probably part of a regal headpiece. The Scythians are known to us by the gold ornamentation they loved and by their battles against many enemies. They faded from history around 300 BC when the Celts drove them out of the Balkans. The archaeological excavations in southern Russia, begun under Tsar Alexander II, produced a flow of Scythian artifacts for the Hermitage that continued into the 20th century. The changes that Alexander brought to the museum, intelligent, constructive, and sensible, were small echoes of the improvements the new Tsar tried to bring to the country as a whole. He wanted to persuade the aristocracy that the institution of serfdom, under which 20 million peasants were the property of landowners and the government, was a ticking bomb. He said the existing order of serfdom cannot remain unchanged. It's better to abolish bondage from above than to wait for the time when it will abolish itself from below. In 1861, Alexander formally emancipated the serfs, a year before slavery was abolished in the United States by Abraham Lincoln. Alexander's Emancipation Proclamation was read in every town square and in manor house courtyards across Russia. Rejoicing serfs kissed the ground they had worked for centuries and which now belonged to them. The rejoicing didn't last long. While they were technically free, agricultural serfs had to pay their former masters for the land they'd been granted, but most of them had neither money nor any means of earning it. The optimism with which Alexander's reign had begun began to fade. A new generation of Russian radicals took up the serfs' cause. Many went to prison or exile. In
1878, the composer Peter Ilyich Tchaikovsky gave voice to the despair of the middle class. We're living through terrible times. On the one side, a completely panic-stricken government. On the other side, ill-fated youth. Thousands of them exiled without trial to lands where not even a crow flies. And between these two extremes, the masses, watching everything without a sign of protest.
One group of terrorists, most of them from middle-class families, dedicated themselves to assassinating public officials. Others went into the countryside preaching rural revolution. The doctrines were abstract. The serfs seemed more bewildered than aroused to action. In St. Petersburg, a group of young men and women calling themselves People's Will began to plot the murders of high-ranking officials. Alexander II, the reformer Tsar, was at the top of their list. On February 13, 1881, a terrorist threw a bomb at the Tsar's carriage. Alexander was returning from a meeting with a committee he'd appointed to write a new constitution. After the explosion, he got out to see what had happened. A second bomb was fatal. This church was built as a memorial to the martyred Tsar on the exact spot where he was murdered. The assassination set off a series of catastrophic circumstances. It turned the educated elite of Russia against its own radical children. It brought about the ascension of Tsar Alexander III, a man so traumatized by his father's murder that he reverted to the arch-conservatism of Nicholas I. Alexander III inherited a pathological fear of revolution. He hunted down radicals, and he began the policy that made him one of the most hated men of his time, Russification. 41% of his people were non-Russians. They were as Slavic as Georgians, as Asian as Mongols and Uzbekis. They were subjects of the Tsar, but spoke their own languages and worshipped God in multiple faiths. Under Alexander III's Russification decrees, only Russian could be spoken in schools and local government offices. The only permissible faith was the Russian Orthodox faith. There was only one acceptable nationalism: Russian. Instead of uniting the vast empire of Alexander III, his Russification decrees divided and enraged it. The assassination of the Tsar's father, Alexander II, was blamed on, among other groups, Russia's 5 million Jews. Since Catherine the Great's reign, the world's largest population of Jews was restricted to an area of Russia called the Pale of Settlement. It included large parts of Russian Poland, and it bordered on Germany and Austria. An anti-Semitic propaganda barrage began after the assassination charges against Russian Jewry. Thousands of Jews were killed by mobs. The police stood by and watched. 1 million Jews fled Alexander III's Russia. Most headed for America. The Hermitage did not escape the Tsar's chauvinism. Alexander decided there wasn't enough Russian painting in the collection. So he created his own Russian gallery within the Hermitage for works such as Fortune Telling by Alexei Venetzianov. And this self-portrait by Karl Ivanovich Brulov. Like many other Russian painters, he had studied the masterworks that hung in the Hermitage. A life-size portrait of Count Leo Tolstoy was the work of Ilya Repin, the foremost realist painter of the time. Repin's Tolstoy remained in the Hermitage for decades. It's now in the Russian State Museum. Aside from his preoccupation with Russian art, Alexander III didn't interfere with the work of the Hermitage's director, Alexander Vassilchikov. He persuaded the Tsar to give the museum pictures from other imperial palaces. Giovanni Battista Tiepolo's Maecenas presenting the arts to Augustus came from the Gatchina Palace, where it had hung for more than a century. Rembrandt's David's Farewell to Jonathan had been bought by Peter the Great. It was sent to the Hermitage from his palace at Peterhof. And Houdon's statue of Voltaire was restored to public view. By the last quarter of the 19th century, the Hermitage collection had grown in numbers and splendor to a degree that would have astonished its founder, Catherine the Great. It was now regarded as one of the world's greatest collections. It was a magnificent panorama of art dating from medieval times. Its collections had been constantly enriched by acquisition of works by great masters. It included magnificent collections of religious objects, Christian artifacts from 13th century France, and priceless icons of the Russian Orthodox Church. Greek and Roman sculpture crowded its halls and galleries. Among the personal possessions of the Tsars, many objects of magnificent craftsmanship would ultimately become part of the museum's permanent exhibits.
The Egyptian collection, begun in 1852, contains some of the most dramatic art of the ancient pharaohs. As the century closed, the last Tsar still lived next door to the Hermitage in the Winter Palace. A painting in his apartments looks across the Neva River to the fortress of Peter and Paul. Originally a proclamation of Russia's defiance of Sweden, the fortress was the centerpiece of old St. Petersburg. Then, in the reign of Alexander III, Peter and Paul became an ominous place, a symbol of the state's savagery.
The prisons, like this one in the dreaded fortress of Peter and Paul, were overflowing. Hundreds of real or suspected socialists, anarchists, or land and freedom activists were being held here, awaiting transportation to Siberia or execution.
Maxim Gorky, the writer, propagandist, and revolutionary. Prince Peter Kropotkin, who donated his family fortune to the revolutionary cause. Then, in 1887, a young man named Alexander Ulyanov was arrested for complicity in a plot to murder the Tsar.
He was convicted and sentenced to be hanged. He spent the last night of his life in this cell.
His sentence would have been commuted to prison or exile had he been willing to inform on his fellow conspirators. But he refused and was executed. Alexander Ulyanov had a younger brother named Vladimir. Radicalized by Alexander's death, he changed his name to Lenin and became the father of the Russian Revolution.
As Russia was tormenting itself with its history, the Hermitage stood serene on the banks of the Neva. History is transitory. Art is alive but immobile. History is obsessed with each moment it passes through. Art fixes its gaze upon eternity.
The death knell of the Tsars was sounding. The art of the Hermitage, like Russia itself, was about to pass from imperial to revolutionary hands.
Seldom in the history of American television has there been such a majestic series on art and history as the one we're watching tonight. Millions of viewers can revel in the great masterpieces and follow the course of Russian history at the same time. This is the time to remind you that this series is brought to you thanks to member dollars. Fortunately, these discretionary dollars were available for us to acquire the Hermitage, A Russian Odyssey. So this is also the time to show your appreciation for this series and to thank 13 and its members for the broadcast. Call one of our toll-free numbers right now and give your financial support for more programs like this one. The numbers are 1-800-468-9913 or 1-800-272-1313. We're counting on you to come through for 13 and its programs tonight. So make that call now. Thank you.
A presentation of South Carolina ETV. This program is made possible by a grant from the American Friends of the State Hermitage Museum, Incorporated. Additional funds were provided by the Robinson Foundation.
In just a few minutes, we'll return to the story of the Hermitage during the final days of the Tsars and while the communists were in power. Stay tuned for the conclusion of the Hermitage, A Russian Odyssey. It's a program filled with rare archival film footage and some of the most glorious works of art ever under siege. In the meantime, right now is your time to show your support for 13 for this kind of programming. Do call one of our toll-free numbers, 1-800-468-9913 or 1-800-272-1313, and become a 13 member with a contribution of $40 or more, or contribute whatever you can afford as your thanks for this magnificent broadcast event. And remember, too, that our corporate friends at AT&T have promised to match every dollar you contribute with a dollar of their own, so do make that call right now.
This fantastic series certainly deserves a thoughtful revisit from time to time, and you can do that at your leisure when you own all 3 parts of our broadcast. We'll send you the box set of 3 VHS tapes as our thanks for your 250 membership contribution to 13. So call right now on one of our toll-free lines. The numbers are 1-800-468-9913 or 1-800-272-1313, and be ready to charge your pledge if possible. If you use your favorite credit card, it saves us paperwork and processing, and we can have your bonus gifts in the mail that much sooner. And here's another suggestion. Ask for the CD-ROM Introduction to the Hermitage as our thanks for your $100 contribution. This disc is IBM compatible and allows you to roam the galleries of the Hermitage at your leisure and zoom in into the great canvases and sculptures amassed over hundreds of years by Russian royalty. Another superb bonus gift is the art history volume, Hidden Treasures Revealed. This is the story of great art masterpieces which survived the Second World War in the secret chambers of the Hermitage. There are hundreds of plates and full-color reproductions of this monumental collection, which disappeared for decades, but which has finally seen the light of day. It's a remarkable story, told in this $150 bonus gift.
And we still have some concert tickets left as our thanks for your generous pledge of $300 or more. But of course, you must use your credit card to receive this bonus gift, a pair of reserved seats at Town Hall on January the 7th. Thomas Hampson of the Metropolitan Opera will be joined by some of his illustrious colleagues for a night of American songs. This promises to be a fabulous gala night of brilliant singing, when Dawn Upshaw, Jerry Hadley, Harlan Blackwell join Thomas Hampson to sing American favorites from the Stephen Foster era to the present time. And again, we'll make the reservation for you if you pledge $300 on any major credit card for a pair of tickets to this long-awaited event. Now, we've given you many bonus incentives to call and join 13 as a member, but the best incentives really are the programs that you watch here. So make your pledge now for more programs like the Hermitage and for the continued excellence of 13 itself. We hope you show up tonight for 13 right now, just as a descendant of one of the great Russian noble families has. Please welcome to 13 Prince Vladimir Golitsyn with your own personal show of support for 13. Vladimir, again, it's wonderful to have you with us.
It's great to be back again, Tom.
September for the premiere, and I wanted to ask you, in terms of the Russian community, what the response has been to our airing of this program.
Well, I think the response has been terrific, Tom. I think everyone that I've met and I've talked to, they've all seen the program. They've all complimented the program. Certainly there are some different opinions from different walks of life, as you can well understand, but I think overall this has been a terrific series, and I think it's a tremendous, tremendous project that you've put together for Channel 13.
And we're very proud to have it here on public television. I wanted to ask you, again, you are descended from a man who was very instrumental in amassing this collection of art. Now, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about how that worked?
I think one of my relatives, Dmitry Golitsyn, who was the ambassador to France from Russia during Catherine the Great's time, he was instrumental in gathering a lot of the art that was eventually shipped to the Hermitage. And in fact, there was another shipment that he had sent which was lost because the ship sank. Oh. So therefore many works were lost that he had also gathered during his time while he was ambassador.
Wow. So that was, did that hurt his career as ambassador?
I don't think it hurt his career, but it was an unfortunate situation.
And I also know that, interestingly enough, you are very involved in your business world with the Russia of today, and have been to the Hermitage and have seen this fabulous collection itself. And I was wondering, when you were there, is there any thought that any of this collection might come and visit the United States at some point?
Well, I don't know that for sure, but it would be wonderful if at some point there were arrangements made to have some showings here in New York City. I think it would have a tremendous welcome, and the lines would be around the block.
I think so too, and hopefully that will happen for all of us. But until that time comes, I think it's just wonderful that we, through this miracle of this medium, can actually bring it right into someone's home.
Absolutely, it's a great series.
Now, of course, we're trying to get those phones to ring, Vladimir. What can you say, perhaps in Russian, if you wouldn't mind, to right over here? What could you say to that viewer out there who still has not made a contribution to 13?
Well, дорогие друзья, я обращаюсь сейчас ко всем русскоговорящим. Поддержите 13-й канал. Такие программы мы на других каналах точно не увидим. И только с тем, что вы будете попечителями 13-го канала, они смогут продолжать делать такие программы в будущем. Так что, пожалуйста, позвоните, помогите и поддержите 13-й канал.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome, Tom.
Of course, I'm going to ask you later to translate that in English so I know exactly what you said. But thanks very much for being with us. I understand you're going to be able to stay and be with us in our next break also.
Be delighted to.
Great. Now, before we get back to the Hermitage, a Russian Odyssey, we want to remind you one more time that the measure of your enjoyment is the measure of your obligation. If your need for intelligent television has kept you here throughout this membership appeal, but you still haven't joined us, do think carefully as you watch the final part of this marvelous story of the Hermitage.
You simply can't find this kind of television anywhere else on television, so imagine what it would be like to lose the option of watching 13. As you know, we depend on a funding mix of government and viewer and corporate dollars, so we must start hearing from you tonight. Take that first step now.
Do please take a moment right now and contribute whatever is appropriate for you. And we know that many people strain their budgets to support public television with a pledge of $50 a year. And we know this because we're not a service for the rich and the highly educated, as some critics would have you believe. Many of our viewers don't subscribe to cable simply because they can't afford the monthly fees. Without charge, public television provides the kind of programming that every age group and every income level, every educational level can use and enjoy. But stop for a moment and think, how much is 13 worth to you?
You can answer that question with a call and a contribution. And now it's time to return to this magnificent series and to the glories of St. Petersburg's Hermitage. The Romanovs are deposed, the Russian Revolution begins, and the treasures of the Hermitage are rediscovered at last in the final chapter of our three-part series. Thanks to member dollars and to support of viewers like you, the story of the Hermitage can now be told and shown to all our viewers.
And our deepest thanks to you if you have already called in to give your support to 13. If you have joined us as a member, you can see what your membership dollars can do when you watch 13 on Sunday night.
It's a toast to George Balanchine and a sublime dance feast for you when the New York City Ballet celebrates the legendary choreographer. The Balanchine celebration, only on Great Performances.
Sunday night at 8. Join us. Our lines will remain open during the program, or you can mail your check to 13, Box 1313, New York 10101.
This program is made possible by a grant from the American Friends of the State Hermitage Museum, Incorporated. Additional funds were provided by the Robinson Foundation. In the heart of old St. Petersburg, the Palace of the Tsars has become home for a stunning collection of the world's great art. It is called the Hermitage. Nurtured by Catherine the Great, it has been more than 2 centuries in the building and collecting. The works on display here bridge the centuries and millennia of mankind. Art and artifacts from the tombs of Egyptian kings. Masterpieces by the world's greatest artists, Matisse, Titian, Picasso. More Rembrandts than any other museum in the world. Exquisite gold work from the Scythians who roamed southern Russia before the birth of Christ. 12th century icons of Russian saints and martyrs, and jewels of the Romanov Tsars. As the 20th century dawned on the Hermitage, the Bolshevik Revolution loomed on the horizon. The art of the Tsars was about to pass to the people. The 1,000-room residence of the Tsars would become part of the Hermitage, making it one of the largest museums in the world.
As a set of buildings, the Hermitage is not Russian. The preponderance of the art assembled inside is foreign. Yet, in the combined total of its components, the Hermitage is Russian. A Tsar built the city upon which we stand. A Russian empress began the collection. Her imperial and Bolshevik successors expanded it into one of the greatest museums on earth.
The Hermitage began as a residence of the Tsars. For more than a century, the royal occupants of this splendid place surrounded themselves with the best art and luxury that a vast and oppressed country could buy. The grandeur of the Tsars' lives isolated them from the horrific conditions under which most of their subjects struggled. Far from the princely palaces, Russia's poor toiled, often doing work performed in other countries by animals. There was almost no hope for the 74 million serfs. They were human property, belonging to landowners or to the government. Serfdom was technically abolished in 1861, but by the turn of the century, the appalling working conditions had spread from the fields to the mines and factories. The Industrial Revolution arrived late in the realm of the Tsars. Western European businesses used cheap Russian labor, much as in the late 20th century, First World industry employed Third World labor. Steel mills were going at full blast, supplying half the iron for England's manufacturing. Russia's new entrepreneurs built vast fortunes on the backs of the country's working poor. In the glittering arcades along St. Petersburg's Nevsky Prospect, the new middle classes strolled and spent. And on the banks of the Neva, the last Tsar ruled in the Winter Palace, all of them oblivious to the inequality and despair just beyond the perimeters of their gilded lives. The Tsar, Nicholas II, was a handsome, amiable man whose English cousin, the Prince of Wales, called weak as water. Nicholas was deeply in love with his German-born wife, Alexandra, who'd been raised by her imperious grandmother, England's Queen Victoria. The passionate bond between Nicholas and Alexandra lasted for all of their doomed lives. The stronger of the two, Alexandra, adored her husband, Nicky, whom she regarded as a child in need of protection from the plots and schemes of worldly men. Nicholas was a human ornament. He was good at ceremonial duties, but terrified of actually ruling a nation of 133 million people. He and Alexandra had 4 beautiful daughters. But they and Russia still needed a son and heir. Nicholas took refuge from his anxieties in family life. He loved the sea and built an immense royal yacht, which became one of the family's playgrounds. The Tsar preferred to cruise on the Bay of Finland with Alexandra and his children rather than try to cope with the intrigues of St. Petersburg or the smoldering miseries of Russia.
The new century was about to invade the Hermitage, this great museum, which began as the hobby and political proclamation of an empress, would be in a few years designated a state or people's museum by the Bolshevik Revolution. At the turn of the century, the Hermitage had ceased to be the Tsar's private collection. It had become a great national museum. Its art was no longer acquired by job lots at the whim of Russian autocrats. The Hermitage's early 20th century curators were highly trained professionals who bought pictures and statuary piece by piece and with exquisite taste. Such as Perugino's Saint Sebastian, painted in 1495. Nor did the new curators of the Hermitage have to scour the world for treasures. They knew that masterpieces were virtually next door in the vast private collection of Russia's nobility. Aristocrats like the Stroganov family, who owned 3 million acres in central Russia and had palaces filled with art that had been collected for generations. The Stroganovs owned, among other masterpieces, Simone Martini's Madonna of the Annunciation. The Hermitage curators persuaded the Stroganovs to bequeath this 14th century masterpiece to the museum, as well as Filippino Lippi's Adoration of the Christ Child, painted in the 1480s. But another family of enormous wealth, the Yusupovs, refused to donate any of their pictures to the Hermitage. Their collection was the most prestigious in all of Russia. Just a part of their art holdings filled the 100 rooms of the Yusupov St. Petersburg Palace. The collection was begun in the 18th century by Prince Nicholas Yusupov, who served in the court of Catherine the Great. He was an ambassador and one of her most trusted buyers of art. And Prince Nicholas acquired a great many paintings for himself as well, such as Boucher's arresting Portrait of a Girl. Nicholas Yusupov, a natural connoisseur, was confident enough of his taste to buy works painted in his own time, such as Louis Boyer's The Billiard Party, which displayed a brilliant range of characters in French society of the early 1800s. The Yusupovs refused to give such works to the Hermitage. Eventually, their collection would get there in spite of them. When the sun rose on the 20th century, the last Tsar was living in these apartments in the Winter Palace, and Vladimir Ilyich Lenin was in exile in Western Europe, planning the Russian apocalypse.
His vision glowed with a radical passion, ignited by the execution of his brother under Tsar Alexander III. Inspired by the doctrines of Karl Marx, Lenin plotted the destruction of the Tsars and the handing over of power to the Russian people. Inside the Winter Palace, the Romanovs were embracing a different vision of the future. The Tsarina Alexandra had a fifth child, the much hoped-for male heir, Alexei. He grew to be a charming, attractive boy who was, however, afflicted by hemophilia, a potentially fatal blood disease common to inbred royal families. Guilt-ridden because Alexei had inherited his illness from her, the Tsarina Alexandra fell under the mesmerizing influence of a peasant mystic named Grigory Rasputin. He claimed that his hypnotic power could control the Tsarevich's bleeding. Subtly playing on the guilt and anxiety of the Tsar and Tsarina, Rasputin extended his influence over affairs of state, as well as their unending domestic crises. The court was fascinated by him. But the aristocracy felt threatened by the peasant mystic's growing power over Nicholas and Alexandra. They wanted Rasputin eliminated. A young nobleman of the House of Yusupov, Prince Felix, appointed himself the savior of Russia. He and several of his friends invited Rasputin to dinner at the Yusupov Palace. The peasant monk's powers of survival were extraordinary. His hosts fed him cakes and wine laced with arsenic. Then they shot him several times. Rasputin staggered into a courtyard where he was bludgeoned to the ground, rolled in a rug, and shoved through the ice of the frozen Neva River. An autopsy found water in his lungs. He had died by drowning. Felix Yusupov retired to his art-stuffed palace, persuaded that he had saved Russia. The collection was unique in that it had remained intact and undivided since the days of Catherine the Great. Like the Yusupov family legitimacy, it was based on tradition and on the past. A new art was thriving in late 19th century Paris. Painting had burst free of the conventions of the past and was seeing the world in exciting new ways. As the Impressionist Camille Pissarro saw the Boulevard Montmartre, Auguste Renoir was painting women with an unsentimental vitality. A retired customs inspector, Henri Rousseau, produced primitive canvases as haunting as dreams. And Claude Monet had been rearranging the shapes and colors of nature to his own unique vision. The largest collection of the new French art was not in Paris, but in Moscow. It had been collected by two Russian millionaires, Ivan Morozov and his friend Sergei Shukin. Of the two pioneering Moscow collectors, Shukin was the more daring. This sketch of Shukin was drawn by Henri Matisse. Shukin had become his friend and patron. Eventually, Matisse was recognized as a master of line and color, but not in the Paris of 1900. His art was just too shocking, too bold for French taste. Sergei Shukin not only accepted the boldness of Matisse, he couldn't get enough of it. He crowded the walls of his Moscow mansion with the works of the French painter. Perhaps the bright colors and primitive shapes of Russian decorative art had schooled Shukin to accept the brilliant palette and graphic distortions of Matisse's painting. In 1909, Sergei Shukin commissioned 2 large panels from Matisse for his house. They were entitled Music and The Dance, an immense 8.5 by 12-foot painting for Shukin's staircase. Shukin bought so many pictures that, inevitably, he was a major contributor to Matisse's enduring reputation. 37 of them ended up in the Hermitage. He also persuaded his friend Ivan Morozov to buy several Matisses. Morozov was generally a more cautious collector than Shukin. He preferred the gentler art of Claude Monet, who found endless inspiration in the haystacks of Giverny. Monet was a painter of sunlight and serenity. His garden at Montgerin was a picture that Morozov felt secure in buying and comfortable in owning. Auguste Renoir also appealed to Morozov, who collected him avidly. Renoir's paintings brimmed with the people and things of everyday life. Here, a neighbor's child. The girl with a fan was the daughter of one of Renoir's friends. Morozov eventually bought 12 of Renoir's works. 6 of them are now in the Hermitage. Edgar Degas suited Morozov's tastes as well. Like Renoir, Degas concentrated on ordinary, intimate life. In a few deft strokes, Degas created elegance from the commonplace. Paul Cézanne was a pioneer of post-impressionism, respected by fellow artists and critics alike. Both Morozov and Shukin bought many of his works. They could have no idea at the time that most of their collection, including 11 of their Cézannes, would eventually move to the Hermitage. Gauguin was another artist who appealed to both Morozov and Shukin. "15 Gauguins from their houses are now in the Hermitage." Morozov kept his collection for the private enjoyment of his friends and family. But Shukin's enthusiasm for his art couldn't be contained. He wanted to show it to everybody. He turned his home into a weekend museum, sharing his extensive knowledge of each work as he guided visitors through the collection. Shukin had no way of knowing, of course, that the days of private art collecting were drawing to a close for both wealthy merchants and for the aristocracy. (1913). Tsar Nicholas and his court celebrated the Romanov family's 300th year on the imperial throne of Russia. Oblivious to the resentment and revolutionary plotting all around them, the royal family paraded in front of the Winter Palace in an ostentatious display of pomp and power. A year later, the Hermitage celebrated its 150th birthday. The great museum was prospering. It was still acquiring major works of art. Jean-Honoré Fragonard's picture, The Stolen Kiss, was acquired from the King of Poland in secret negotiations. Fragonard was an incurable romantic and a master of textures. You can almost hear the rustle of the lady's skirt and delight in her surprise. One of the world's great paintings by El Greco of the apostles Peter and Paul was bequeathed to the Hermitage by the Durnovo family, thanks to the diplomatic persuasions of the curators. Perhaps the grandest acquisition of the early 20th century was the Madonna with a Flower. What was thought to be an obscure heirloom belonging to the Benoit family was recognized by a Hermitage curator as a lost work of Leonardo da Vinci. In 1914, World War I exploded across Europe. The Tsar's generals told him it would take a year to get Russia ready for war. Nicholas ignored them. Men and boys from all over the empire were drafted and shipped off to the front, under-equipped, untested, and undertrained. 2 million of them died. $4 million were wounded. Hospitals overflowed. Even the throne rooms and halls of the Winter Palace were turned into infirmaries. The Hermitage staff became alarmed that the German army might invade Russia, march into Petrograd, and take the art of the museum back to Germany. In a massive evacuation, art was packed in specially constructed crates and shipped to the Kremlin in Moscow for safekeeping. Anti-German sentiment grew so virulent that the city's German name, St. Petersburg, was changed to the Russian Petrograd, which still meant Peter's City. In Petrograd, there was growing misery. People were starving. If Russia were ever ripe for revolution, this was the moment.
We are rapidly reaching the conclusion of the story of the Hermitage and its fabulous collection of paintings and sculpture. If this is the kind of television you expect to see on 13, this is the time to make your pledge. We need you to get on board. The number is 1-800-272-1313, and the call is free. And please remember that AT&T has offered to match every dollar you contribute with $1 of its own. In fact, AT&T staff volunteers have given up their private time to be here to take your call. So match that company's spirit of generosity with some generosity of your own. Get on the phone and join 13 as a member. Tom?
Thanks, Raphael. And we do need you to get on the phone right now. Really, it's terribly quiet here in the studio, and it's very important that we make these minutes count. It's been a very exciting night for us tonight, showing this wonderful, wonderful show. And we do have our matching grant from AT&T. These are all reasons for you to go to your telephone right now and call 1-800-468-9913 or 1-800-272-1313. You'll feel a lot better going to sleep tonight if you call 13 tonight and become a member. Or if you already are a member, why not consider pledging something additional at this time of the year? This is the season for gift giving, And you'll know that you'll feel a lot better if you've made a contribution to 13 tonight. And again, don't wait for someone else to make the phone call that you know that only you can make yourself. This series would have been unheard of in the recent past, of course, because of the long Cold War. And the tremendous changes in global politics have unlocked the glories of the Hermitage. And member dollars from viewers just like you brought this stunning series to 13. So show your appreciation right now by making a financial commitment of your own to 13. Now, the best thing about joining 13 with a membership contribution of $250 is that this special broadcast doesn't have to end. When you make that contribution right now, our thanks will be the boxed set of 3 VHS tapes of the Hermitage, A Russian Odyssey, the entire series that you've been enjoying this evening. Of course, without our pledge breaks. Now, this would make a wonderful addition to your personal library, and of course, it would also make an outstanding gift to your club or to some favorite organization interested in history and the history of art.
We have other bonus gifts if you join 13 during the next few minutes. Become a 13 member with a donation of $100 and ask for the CD-ROM Introduction to the Hermitage. This disc is IBM compatible, and it's a bonus gift that will give you endless hours of pleasure and knowledge as you wander through the galleries of the Hermitage. If you love art books, then this is the gift for you. Hidden Treasures Revealed is a magnificent volume telling the story of fabulous art collections hidden for years in the Hermitage following the collapse of Germany during the Second World War. The story is intriguing, and the reproductions in this volume are outstanding. Please remember that you can charge your pledge for $150 or more for any amount you choose, in fact, on any major credit card. You have your favorite card handy, though, when you reach that phone, please.
And speaking of credit cards, you must use a credit card when you pledge $300 or more for a pair of tickets to I Hear America Singing. Now, this is a wonderful night of traditional American songs, which will be hosted by Thomas Hampson of the Metropolitan Opera. And he'll be sharing the stage with Frederica von Stade, Dawn Upshaw, Jerry Hadley, and Harlan Blackwell. The night is January the 7th, 1996. The place, Manhattan's Town Hall, just off Times Square. And you remember, you must use a credit card to receive this bonus gift.
The name Golitsyn runs like a thread through the imperial tapestry of Russian history and Russian nobility. And we're delighted to welcome Prince Vladimir Golitsyn to our studio tonight. Vladimir, if I can call you that.
Absolutely, Raphael.
Thank you for staying with us. Now, during the last break, you talked about your illustrious ancestor and his efforts to bring art to the Hermitage. Some of it was successful, some of it was not so successful. In general, what has been the role of the Russian nobility in bringing art and culture to Russia?
Well, I think, Raphael, the Russian nobility were always supporters of all of the arts, and they were instrumental in not only bringing paintings from all over the world and music, but they also opened up their purses and supported financially these beginnings, which of course was very, very important.
Now tell me, what is the current Russian nobility doing to bring culture and art to Russia and to bring it to us here in the United States?
Well, here in the United States, we do have a Russian Nobility Association, which is very, very active in the genealogical research. Our chairman is Prince Alexei Shcherbatov, who is one of the leading world figures in genealogy. We have a fabulous library, which is a unique library. It's a very special library. And so we manage to keep track of those who are the real nobility and those who sometimes claim to be but are not.
Now, how do you do that?
Well, our chairman, Prince Shcherbatov, is a very knowledgeable fellow, and he has much paperwork and research that he does in tracking down the various individuals who approach us.
Now, you talked earlier to Tom about that you've recently been to the Hermitage and seen the collection there. How do you think it is? Do you think that the current government is doing it proud?
Well, I think the current government and the past governments and everybody who's Russian takes great pride in the Hermitage. And I think that the support is there and will continue to be. And hopefully, as was mentioned the last break, if the Hermitage decides to send exhibits around the world, this will allow many more people to participate, what is a very, very beautiful collection.
Now, the last time you were here with the last break, you gave a very passionate Russian plug to your Russian countrymen who are watching this show, enjoying it, but not obviously becoming a member. I don't know what you said, but it was beautiful and it certainly worked. And I'm wondering if you might be able to do it again for us.
I would love to. I would
please,
love to.
Please, the television is yours. Take your time.
Еще раз, друзья, хочу вам напомнить, все, что 13-й канал делает вообще для культуры, и помочь им очень нужно. Вашу денежную помощь они ожидают. Сейчас очень много русских, в Нью-Йорке особенно, которые могут себе позволить поддержать 13-й канал. Так что, пожалуйста, позвоните, телефоны сейчас еще, можете позвонить сейчас. И тоже еще хотел сказать спокойной ночи, Анночка.
All right. Vladimir, that was terrific. Again, like Tom asked you to do, you're going to have to translate it for me later on, but I appreciate you being here today, and thank you for all your help.
It was a pleasure, Raphael. Thank you.
Okay. Now, you know those 500 cables you hear about so much? Well, they're still not around. It's still very far in the future of America. But what looms in the present is a steady reproduction of public funding, reduction, that is, of public funding for public television, with dire consequences to 13. Public funding has already been sharply cut, and we have lost millions of dollars from our annual budget. Most of those funds were unrestricted. That means they could be used for any aspect of the station's business. Combined with money from our viewers, those public dollars help pay the rent, and they help us make local programs. In fact, they help keep 13 going, so that we can provide a home for programs like the Hermitage. Without those public dollars, your support becomes more important than ever. If you have made a contribution during this intermission, thank you. And our thanks also to AT&T and its staff for supporting our fundraising efforts and providing its $15,000 challenge grant.
Now, whatever amount you choose to pledge, from $5 to $5,000, don't forget that your help comes at a true turning point in the future of 13 and all of public television. 13 believes that television services shouldn't be judged by commercial standards. We believe here that the life of the spirit that is nourished by beauty and ideas and ideals deserves more than equal time with a life of violence, scandal, and mindlessness that occupies so much of this powerful medium. And what enables us to serve those ideas are the dollars that our viewers give. Dollars that help us bring you programs like this one, which will be coming your way on Saturday night. So enjoy it as a 13 member. And keep in mind that this is what member dollars can do. Take a look.
Celebrate the holidays in grand style as Carnegie Hall rings out with the festive sounds of Christmas. Join renowned classical performers Kathleen Battle and Frederica von Stade, jazz trumpet virtuoso Wynton Marsalis, and Andre Previn with the St. Luke's Orchestra and a full choir. It's a joyous holiday treat for the whole family. A Carnegie Hall Christmas concert next time on Great Performances. Saturday at 9 on member-supported 13. Our lines will remain open during the program, or you can mail your check to 13, Box 1313, New York 10101.
Lenin returned from exile to orchestrate the revolution. He harangued the hungry, angry mobs of Petrograd, preaching class warfare and the violent overthrow of the Tsar. To the troops, his message was, why fight anymore? Take your gun, go home and seize your piece of land. 2 million deserted. Trains began carrying more troops away from the front than to it. In Petrograd, mobs of soldiers and civilians demonstrated in front of the Winter Palace, carrying banners calling for bread, land, and peace. The hungry, desperate Russian nation would no longer be denied. Out of war came the Bolshevik Revolution, which turned Russia into the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Never has there been so successful a collaboration in calamity as the one between the last myopic rulers of Imperial Russia and the communist revolutionaries who overthrew them. On March 15th, 1917, Tsar Nicholas II abdicated. He left Petrograd aboard his private train. Stripped of all his power, he was taken away by the revolutionaries to an unknown destination and destiny. Nicholas left behind a hapless provisional government. On the morning of November 7th, 1917,
Vladimir Lenin's Bolshevik cadres moved in to take control of Petrograd. The remnants of the provisional government were holed up in the Winter Palace. A small group of Bolshevik Red Guards broke in. They moved swiftly down the so-called dark hallway of tapestries toward the former Tsar's apartments. The provisional government usually held its meetings in the opulent Malachite room of the Winter Palace. But on November 7th, nobody was there. The Red Guards discovered the last of the provisional ministers in a small dining room and arrested them. The Bolsheviks were now in power. Mobs swarmed into the streets as hated symbols of imperial majesty were torn down. The threat of looting and destruction in Petrograd, a city of monuments and palaces, was very real. The Winter Palace did not escape unscathed. The home of the Tsars was now empty, smashed, and without purpose. The Hermitage at the far end of the Winter Palace fared better. Lenin sent troops to protect it.
The decades following the Russian Revolution were one of the 20th century's greatest sagas of sorrow, blood, and futility. For the Hermitage, the revolution meant vast rearrangement, the loss of some of its treasures, the addition of others from Soviet museums and private collections.
Lenin's slogan, "Art belongs to the people," meant just that. This incredibly meticulous painting by Jacques-Louis David now belonged to the people, not to the Yusupov family, from whom it was appropriated. When troops were sent out to seize the Yusupov collections of paintings and jewelry at the family palace, they found nothing at first. After threatening the palace staff with their lives, great paintings were uncovered in secret rooms, including Boucher's Birth and Triumph of Venus. Eventually, 400 canvases from the Yusupov Palace went to the Hermitage Museum. The Yusupov family had hoped someday to reclaim the fabulous art collection they'd left behind. They never did. The enormous collection of the Moscow merchant Ivan Morozov now also belonged to the people. Most of it went to the Hermitage. Van Goghs, Cézannes, Bonnards, Valentons. Morozov never reclaimed the collection he'd spent so many years acquiring. He escaped to Germany, heartbroken over his loss. He died 4 years later. The merchant Sergei Shukin was far more resilient than Morozov, even though his entire mansion had been taken over by the Bolsheviks and turned into a museum. Shukin, who loved his art and didn't want to be separated from it, was allowed to live on in his mansion's servants' quarters and wear the uniform of a guide. He showed visitors through rooms full of paintings that had once belonged to him. Shukin had first met the Spanish painter Pablo Picasso in Paris in 1902. Picasso was 22 years old. Shukin became his friend as well as his patron, and he was frequently the butt of Picasso's brutish sense of humor. Picasso's melancholy painting, Two Sisters, was among the first acquired by Schuken. And the portrait of Soler, Picasso's Barcelona tailor. When Picasso switched to the new Cubism, Schuken continued his enthusiastic support. He understood how Picasso's pioneering Three Women brought together all the influences that had shaped his genius: Iberian sculpture, primitive African art, and the work of Paul Cézanne. In Violin and Guitar, Picasso challenged the viewer's notions about what art is and what it is not. Of the 51 Picassos collected by Sergei Schuken, 31 are in the Hermitage. Schuken would have remained at his museum, but as an ex-millionaire, he endured constant threats from radical revolutionaries. He finally abandoned his art and joined his family in Germany. His collection was eventually divided between the Pushkin Museum in Moscow and the Hermitage in St. Petersburg. The Hermitage, which had originally been just an addition to the palace, now overflowed into the Tsar's empty living quarters, filling it with art from all the nationalized Russian private collections. The Grand Winter Palace now became an addition to the Hermitage, making it one of the largest museums in the world. For Lenin, the Hermitage was a magnificent public compensation. He didn't have much food to offer the people, but he could give them the art and palaces of the Tsars. Working-class people could feel that, in some imprecise way, this magnificent residence belonged to them. Ordinary Russians could see what they'd gotten from the revolution, and perhaps empty stomachs could be endured a while longer. The first exhibit open to every Russian was of Egyptian art and artifacts. Begun under Tsar Nicholas I, the Egyptian collection was magnificently exotic to Russian eyes. It was a feast of ancient treasures that now belonged to them. The art of the Hermitage proved useful to Lenin. But the mere existence of the Tsar and his family remained a threat. On July 16th, 1918, Nicholas, his wife and children, were shot. Six years later, in 1924, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin himself died after a series of strokes. St. Petersburg got its third name, Leningrad. Lenin's decree that art and antiquities could not be exported from the Soviet Union was overturned. Suddenly, the incalculable wealth of the Hermitage was threatened by the policies of Lenin's successor. Joseph Stalin couldn't have cared less about art. To him, it was just another form of state property.
In the 1920s and 30s, Stalin's Commissariat for Foreign Trade began selling off parts of the collection to raise hard cash for food and agricultural equipment. Andrew Mellon, a former secretary of the United States Treasury, picked up 21 masterworks for only $7 million.
Mellon had collected from many sources, but he was especially proud of his Hermitage acquisitions. He wrote to President Franklin Roosevelt, offering his large collection of paintings to the American people. Mellon even offered to finance a building in Washington to house his collection. Roosevelt and Congress accepted immediately. And the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. was established. The Mellon acquisitions included 5 Rembrandts, among them Portrait of a Turk. It had been one of the finest pictures in the collection of Catherine the Great. And 4 Van Dycks, including the portrait of the young Philip Lord Horton. Mellon took only masterpieces. These were not minor works from the Hermitage basement. Among them, Raphael's Alba Madonna, regarded as one of the most perfect pictorial compositions of the Renaissance. And Venus with a Mirror, painted by Titian when he was nearly 70 years old. He was entering a period of supreme achievement which lasted well into his 90s. The Mellon pictures included Pietro Perugino's triptych, painted in 1485. Mellon's acquisitions were only a small part of the Hermitage collection that had been sold off by Stalin's Commissariat. No piece of Hermitage art was, in Stalin's view, too precious to sell. Not even Scythian gold. This treasured heritage of pre-Christian tribal art dug from Russia's own soil was put up for auction. The director of the Hermitage at the time was Boris Legrand, a professional elected by his co-workers. He'd failed to stop Stalin from selling great paintings, but Legrand felt that these ornaments from the dawn of Russian civilization must be saved whatever the risk. When he was ordered to hand over Scythian gold, he refused to release a single piece. Legrand died in Stalin's purges of 1936 and 7. In June 1941, Hitler's Germany invaded the Soviet Union and advanced toward Leningrad. The Nazis intended to completely level the city. Leningrad dug in and prepared for the worst. In the Hermitage, the curators and staff had made plans to protect its contents, as they had during Napoleon's 1812 invasion and World War I. In preparation for evacuation, crates for each work of art had already been constructed. The staff packed 24 hours a day without stopping. In 6 days and nights, items from the treasury were wrapped. The gems of the Romanovs, hundreds of brooches and watches, and the fabulous household and ceremonial trappings of the Tsars. Sculptures from all the galleries were assembled to be crated or taken to the basement to be buried in sand. More than 3,000 crates were packed. Paintings were taken out of their frames and rolled up, 10 or 15 together. The empty frames were left on the walls as symbols of the staff's faith that the art would someday come back. Among the last paintings taken down was Rembrandt's Descent from the Cross. Because of its fragile condition, it was carefully packed in its own special crate. And on the final day, Houdon's Voltaire was prepared to be evacuated for the third time. Within 10 days, the galleries had been totally stripped of their treasures. Nearly 2 million pieces had been packed. 3 trains were waiting to take them deep into the Russian heartland. At dawn on July 1st, 1941, Joseph Orbelli, the director of the museum, stood on the platform weeping as the first 2 trains pulled out of the station. The trains were going to a hiding place so secret that even the engineers didn't know their final destination. The 3rd train never left. Hitler's forces had closed the circle around the city. The siege of Leningrad had begun. Two and a half million people were trapped inside Leningrad with all supply routes cut off. The terrible winter of 1942 was one of the coldest on record. Fuel reserves were exhausted. The water supply no longer functioned. Daily bread rations were cut to 4 ounces per person. During the siege, the Hermitage remained open to the public. A few minor works that had not been packed for evacuation remained on display. In the Hermitage workshops, there were vats of joiner's glue used to make frames. The starving staff survived on a jelly made from that glue. The siege had become a test of the human spirit. As the bombs fell outside, the Hermitage basements housed the museum's staff and their families. 2,000 people. The stark living conditions were recorded in pencil sketches by architect Alexander Nikolsky. The concussion from exploding shells blasted out most of the Hermitage window panes. Winter storms blew in through shattered windows. The skylight in Nicholas I's main gallery was smashed. Snow and glass fell on the exquisite parquet floors. The staff painstakingly removed the mixture of snow and glass, bucket by bucket. Young soldiers and other workers came in to replace the glass and clean up. One of the guides, Pavel Gubchevsky, gave them a special tour. He described in detail the pictures that had hung in each empty frame. His descriptions were so vivid that they could almost see Rembrandt's Prodigal Son and Da Vinci's Madonna. The siege of Leningrad lasted 900 days. 1 million civilians died. Of the 1 million who died, 475,000 are buried in this memorial cemetery on the northern side of the Neva.
There are few grave markers, names, sentiments, mottos. Only the years in which death claimed so many are cut in stone.
The siege of Leningrad was not the first mass self-sacrifice of the Russians for their motherland. There's an intense patriotic reflex in these people. They beat back the Teutonic Knights in 1242. Then they suffered and outlasted the Mongol hordes that thundered across Russia. They repelled the Swedish invasion in the early 18th century. When Napoleon's army reached Moscow in 1812, the Russians burned their own city rather than surrender it to the French. And in the 1940s, half the citizens of Leningrad died rather than hand over their city to the Germans. In the city's great memorial cemetery, Mother Russia broods eternally over her lost children. The Hermitage withstood and triumphed over the Nazi siege and was restored to its 18th century splendor. Slowly, like the return of blossoms after a bitter winter, normal life resumed in the city built by Peter the Great. Then, during the death throes of Soviet communism, the citizens of Leningrad restored its original name, St. Petersburg. Opening its doors to visitors 6 days a week, the Hermitage draws one into something more than a museum. It's a storehouse of great intentions, displays of opulence, proclamations of personal and national grandeur. And you feel that the imperial and communist creators of it all departed only yesterday. The Hermitage's splendid interiors bespeak an indifference to cost, to expense, that is inconceivable to us. For art lovers, it offers masterpieces in paint and carved stone. To school children, the Hermitage presents the art and artifacts of history. And Russians of many nationalities and regions seem to feel a sense of the past, common to them all.
There's something that is intangible yet reassuring here. It's the sum of the Hermitage's triumphant struggles to survive. It tells its visitors that great Russian landmarks have withstood the cataracts of history.
The art within these walls is a testament to endurance. The antiquities of Rome endure. The profound humane vision of Rembrandt endures. Leonardo da Vinci endures. And here, Russian history proceeds onward. Its past casting a beacon of hope across its future.
This is a monument to the permanent in Russian life. Like the novels of Tolstoy and the poetry of Pushkin, the Hermitage will continue to express this culture, no matter what political adventures may consume or fail it.
Come to the end of our odyssey through Russian history and through the galleries of the Hermitage in St. Petersburg. This is a first for many of us in the West, the first time that the sweep of Russian history has been presented in a manageable way, and the first time that we've been able to see what's inside the Hermitage. This remarkable journey was made possible by 13 member dollars, and now we ask you to replace some of those dollars with a contribution of your own. So please, go to your phone right now. Although it is late, our operators are still standing by, and they are waiting to hear from you. The number is 1-800-272-1313. The call is free, and we have some wonderful thank you gifts if you can join 13 as a member. If you were thrilled by this series tonight, then we must hear from you now. Call and join 13 as a member. Thank you.